Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, June 22nd joint study session with the Littleton Planning Commission and the Littleton Historic Preservation Board. Tonight, we have a study session only. Additional discussion on the historic character of downtown Littleton. Just a quick recap for our audience and maybe some of you board or commission members. We're now about a third of the way in our year-and-a-half process changing the city's old zoning code to a new unified land use code. A few months back, we made several emergency changes to the old zoning code that affects the city and downtown in particular. We did this because changes are affecting downtown rapidly, and the city didn't want to wait another year until the new land use code was approved. The future land use code will have several building blocks.
Thanks.
What's that? Oh, downtown being one of them, probably the major corridors, the neighborhood are part of these building blocks. One building block specifically we're looking at now, and that's the downtown building block. And we've been working with staff probably for the last 3, 4, 5 months on this building block. The Planning Commission has specifically been looking at the entire downtown area that's shaped like a football. Tonight's session, we're specifically zeroing in on the Main Street and Alamo corridors streets. With that introduction, I'll turn it over to Kim. You here finally?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, and signed on the nick of time. So Kim, you're up, and we also have Andrea Mimna from staff, and we also have Jennifer Henninger, and we also have Reed, Ace Attorney Reed. So take it away, Kimberly.
All right, thank you very much. And thank everyone here this evening for participating in the tours and giving such wonderful input. I personally learned a lot from those tours and just enjoyed being with you. What we did, and you should have this document, Colleen sent it out this morning, and Andrea will be able to share it also on the screen and as we go through it. You should have received a 3-page document that really summarizes the input that y'all gave after the tour. Wonderful input. You will actually recognize your words because we just basically cut and pasted the wonderful comments that people gave on the tours and put it into a 3-page document, which serves the intent that we started out with, which was to provide meaningful input to the process, the consultants that are going through the process of updating the plan, and to do it in a timely manner so that they could incorporate it into their materials, which are due to the city on July 1st. So we're on June 22nd, so we're actually meeting that goal. One of the things that I'd like to do is go through this document and see what we think. Do we like it? Is the information that we want to give to the consultants? Is this what Planning Commission and Historical Preservation Board thinks? And this is what we'd like to see incorporated into the plan going forward. We can do it we can just go through the document quickly and say, are we for this or against it? And just go from there. One of the things I want to say is that at first it was like, how do we take all of these comments and somehow make sense of it? But everyone's comments were very interesting, and there was a lot of consistency. So it was very easy to see that we were actually very much on the same page. And that was interesting. And we were able to incorporate that and kind of group the comments into certain areas. And also, I would say that there's something of a bell curve. We had some outliers on either sides of the curve where we had basically, one person who felt a certain way about building heights or, landscape features or parking lots or something like that we really didn't see reflected in the rest of the group. And when I say the group, I'm talking about the individuals who actually went on the tours and turned in their comments. So,
Yep.
we didn't incorporate some of those outliers because they just were not shared by the majority of the group. And so I think tonight, I'd just like to go through the document. I hope you've had a chance to read it. And its intent is that it's pretty easy to read, but and just kind of go through it and see what we think about it.
Kim, can I ask you a question?
You certainly may.
Before you start, how many people took the tour out of, let's see, we got 9 and 9, so 18 of us PC members and HPB. And okay.
Yeah, well, we can just do a quick show of hands, the people that went on the tours.
So Bruce, hand down.
Yeah,
okay.
I wasn't able to.
Okay, so maybe 2/3 or half of this group. Rick did it 6 times, I think. How many people turned in comments out of, say, half the group? Okay, well, okay, pretty much everybody that went on the tour.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just curious before you start.
We also had staff members that did the tour.
Okay, right.
And we did get an email comments from Carol Fay, Councilwoman Carol Fay.
Okay. Yeah, we did have council members go along on the tour as well. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
No, that's quite all right. So I hope everyone has the document in front of you, but Andrea, could you share your screen and put it up there?
Yep.
Does that work?
Yeah, just give me a second here.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah. Excellent. And I won't read it aloud, but if we could just go down, the first couple of paragraphs are from the Envision comprehensive plan documents, that were done, gosh, over the course of 2019, last year. The words that kept coming up from the community, from all of the input that they got, were small town feel, active in daytime, stable populations. And what we did was we wanted to make sure that we were kind of addressing that. And the comments and the thoughts were addressing that. And then looking at the community character elements that we were looking at, and this is basically from planning and preservation literature, is distinctiveness, which is the streetscape, architecture, historic preservation, especially since we're dealing with a historic downtown, social elements, cultural events, facilities, restaurants, retail, parks, open space, and then also the gateways, define geographical and physical entryways into the city for walking, driving, transit, however you might get into the city. And then what we've come up with is the statements and directives that we would like to see. And when I say we, it's Planning Commission and HPB would like to see in the documents that the consultants come back with. So if we could move up a little bit to character statements and directives. Andrea, yeah, got it. Kind of other way.
You set up, okay.
Yeah, move it, scroll up, yeah.
There we go.
And again, this comes literally from somebody on the Zoom call right now. A wonderful comment that was given. And it really does. It kind of sums up what we're dealing with. That Littleton's downtown character is similar to downtowns of the same era all across the country. But what makes it special is its context. It is an historic downtown within an otherwise fairly typical suburban community, which is us.
Okay,
Yes?
let me break in, because I've got a problem with fairly typical suburban community. Something that Littleton has always been quite proud of. It started out as a standalone town, and then was eventually enveloped by suburbia, but it's not suburbia in the same sense that Highlands Ranch is, 30 years old and fake cachet. So I'd like to make a change here in that the last part of it, it's an authentic historic downtown within a distinct standalone town that grew and is now enveloped in a suburban setting.
Yeah, well, that just, yeah, okay. Does anybody else have a comment about that specifically?
I agree with Mark.
Yeah, I agree with Mark. The fairly typical suburban community, I don't think is Littleton.
We were standalone. We were a town out on the prairie, and we were eventually enveloped by suburbia, but we're not the typical suburbia.
Okay, so 100 years ago, we were a town. And so do we want to go into all of that in this sentence, or do we want to say an otherwise typical community? Because that's what we are today, and get rid of suburban.
Again, every citizen always talks about how we were an authentic town, we're a real town. So I'd like to somehow, whether you turn my 12 words into 6 is up to you, but I'd like to somehow get that feeling in that we were a real town, eventually, like I say, enveloped by suburbia.
Or perhaps delete fairly typical. I mean, this actually is a model that's very common in cities across the United States. You might look at Downers Grove, Illinois, which has been enveloped in the Chicagoland area. That had a downtown.
Right.
Evanston, Illinois, it had a downtown. It was separate. And, this is a suburban context, except for our downtown.
And so maybe the upper quarter of our town was part of a real town, separate town. The rest of it, you're right, is suburbia that came in after it was surrounded. So anyway, that's all
I'm going to ask you to give me the words, though.
All right, let's see.
Can I throw out an alternative?
Oh, go ahead, Andy.
I feel like we're rephrasing because of a reaction to fairly typical suburbans. Why don't we just take that out? We can say what makes it special is our context, and we have an authentic historic downtown, period.
I agree.
Like it.
I like it.
Okay.
Or maybe unique, a word unique suburban community.
What makes it, what do you think makes us unique?
Because when you say typical suburban community, it reminds me of Aurora. That's a typical. So I want to emphasize that it's really unique because we have a mining town that started as mining and agricultural. It was basically surrounded by a lot of suburbs, but the downtown Littleton is really unique in Denver area. It's not Boulder, it's not Denver, it's not Arvada. They are very difficult characteristics. Each one is unique. This one has a different cultural and historical background.
I'm going to make the argument that every town is unique. They have their own history. And so to me, using the word unique is kind of I don't know, it doesn't really mean anything to me because I feel every community has a unique history and a unique way that their town developed over time. So I would shy away from using the word unique.
So I kind of like it's an authentic historic downtown, period.
I do too.
Yeah.
Are you guys good with that?
I am.
Short and
Definitely
sweet.
good with that.
It does remove the concept of context, however.
Yeah, it doesn't really explain what the context is. I think that perhaps to get to Mark's original point, it's an authentic historic downtown of a small town that's now in a fairly typical suburban community.
You could say original small town.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what original small town.
I mean, it implies because there is a downtown, it implies that there was some small town around it, but I think being more clear about that, but still talking about how once you get out of the original small town, it is actually fairly typical and very, very similar to the rest of the suburban communities once you're outside of that original boundary.
Could you add the word now before within a suburban community so that it says downtown of an original small town now within a suburban community?
Yes. There you go.
Yeah, that's good.
Amy, did you have
Much
something?
cleaner.
I like this better than what I was going to say. I was going to say it's an authentic downtown of an original small town now enveloped by a larger metropolitan area.
Okay.
But I like now within a suburban community better.
Okay, it's an authentic history, and Andrea, I saw you typing, so that's really awesome that you can actually do that.
Yeah.
It's an authentic historic downtown of an original small town now within a suburban community. Okay.
Okay.
Do we like that?
Do we need the suburban? Why we don't use urban?
Maybe we should just call it.
Because we are an urban area. We are within Denver metro urban area.
Well, our residential areas are suburban.
Bruce, you're shaking your head.
I think it has gotten too wordy, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't see us, Bezat, I don't see us as urban in the context of a Denver. I think suburban is the right phrasing for what we're talking about here.
Do we really need to say an original small town, though? I mean, it's almost redundant to me. It's an authentic historic downtown surrounded by or within a suburban community. I mean, I think original and authentic are similar.
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling with that too, but
it seems redundant and wordy.
Well, could you just take out the word original?
I think that works.
Within a suburban community or surrounded by suburban communities.
Get back to
Now surrounded by
historic downtown within a small town.
But all small towns have downtowns, you know,
I like
somewhere.
One thing that's different about Littleton that the consultants have pointed out to me is where our suburban housing is. They have never found another community of all the projects they worked on where we have our suburban houses basically defined within our city limits like they are with commercial around it, including Broadway, Littleton Boulevard. They thought, we talked about suburban, that was the thing that was most interesting to them about Littleton was all of our suburban housing right in the middle of the city boundaries, which they had never really seen before. Because I said we were typical too, and they didn't think we were typical of a suburban area. I mean, we were our own town up until late 1970s. We were the economic center down here in the entire South area.
Right.
Just a comment as we go through this.
So instead of saying now surrounded by a suburban community, should we say now surrounded by a metropolitan area?
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. I like that better too.
Yes.
I mean, Jefferson County is
Agreed.
true suburban.
Mm-hmm.
And Highlands Ranch too.
But
and
Rick, what you were
Centennial.
saying, your comments about whoever described it as we're unique in that way that our housing is within the city. I think if you know that, it's one thing that if you're aware what the city boundaries are, but I would disagree in that if you look around, we've got Inglewood, we've got Centennial, we've got all kinds of housing surrounding us that a typical person could not discern what's within the city and what's not.
Well, that's always been the case in Littleton. And Centennial never had an urban center. They were just a suburban area that was just taken away. They would have preferred to be in Littleton, but Littleton didn't want Centennial.
I agree, but the housing itself, if you just look around and you say, where is Littleton versus Centennial versus Inglewood, those suburban parts, I'm not sure that you could tell a lot of difference, but that's where our downtown is authentic and unique. That part of it is.
I think that was the intent of this character statement, exactly what you said.
Okay, are we comfortable with the language that's on the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, let's scroll down.
Oops.
This is fun.
Yeah, I hope everybody brought their lunch because we're going to be here a while.
Well, sorry, it's hard to.
Oh, that's okay. I understand. I do that all the time. Okay, now we're preserving and capitalizing on Littleton's signature attributes. And what we pulled out of this, and I will read these, you can just see how they sound. Intact historical character of Alamo and Main Streets, the bookend design of Main Street with Courthouse and Carnegie Library, define geographical and physical east and west entryways into the city, pedestrian greenway along Little's Creek, and strong architectural continuum with buildings from incorporation to present day.
I ask a question about what the meaning of intact historical character is?
The meaning that I took away from that was that Alamo and Main Street is actually intact as far as a lot of the buildings and the land uses that are exist, especially on Main Street and on Alamo. That that really is the way it was, and that those are the original buildings, and they're still pretty faithful to what they were originally. There's a lot of integrity there.
We're sort of trying to define character as part of this document. So to use character, historical character, in defining character is a little dodgy. Would you consider saying instead intact historical fabric of Alamo and Main Street?
Fabric or integrity?
Sure.
Or even more directly, it would be surviving historic structures, or historic structures that have survived.
I like the word surviving.
Yeah.
Not that I want to make this a 12-page document, but I have two other items that I would add. One I think is strong. The other one, perhaps that ship has sailed a long time ago. The first one would be a relationship to the Platte River. That's always important to Littleton. It's weakened a little bit, of course, by the river being moved, but I think the relationship to the Platte River is important to downtown. The second one is a connection to Littleton's agricultural past, or agriculture past. That one could come or go, depending on what the group thinks.
So I would like to consider adding the proximity to the light rail station as well as an opportunity.
Yeah, that's a hell of an attribute.
I'm struggling with surviving historic structures. That can mean that there's two, you know what I mean? The fact that there, when you go down Alamo, for instance, you know, you see many of those buildings have been there, you know, for decades, and the usage hasn't changed that much. So I would, you know, I'd call it intact. Surviving historic structures to me is pretty weak in my mind. It doesn't really tell me anything.
Would you consider like critical mass of surviving historic structures? Or do you really prefer intact?
I don't even know that it's so much the structures. I don't know. Maybe it's I'm only the only one that's having a problem with it. But that just seemed kind of meh to me.
Well, the majority of the buildings on both streets are original buildings to the street. By far, the majority of them are.
So wouldn't that be intact historical integrity? And I'm using integrity in that kind of architectural way.
I guess one other question could be is how many of those that are, you know, existing have been rehabilitated in some way. I mean, I think that was one of the main points brought up on Main Street, is that so many of the buildings have been rehabilitated or changed in some way.
That doesn't change your historic significance, though. That's part of historic preservation. When it's done within the preservation guidelines and laws that we have, they are continued historic. But very few actually have. They've changed uses a lot, but very few buildings have actually been modified where you can't tell what they were originally. There's 19 buildings on Alamo, and all but 2 were built before 1955. So, and there's 46 buildings on Main Street, and all but 7 were built before 1955. 11 before 1900. So we have a lot of integrity here. Surviving, I don't like that word surviving. It's like they're lucky that they're here. Me.
What about extant?
What we have is a lot of integrity.
I like integrity or fabric.
I was going to say fabric. I feel like we're wordsmithing a bit, but I think it's important. It's more than just the structures. It's the structures and their siting and their relationship to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Craig, you were talking about the spaces between the buildings.
Right.
I like that. I like fabric.
By the way, the heading "Preserve and Capitalize on Littleton's." That's all of Littleton. Shouldn't it be Littleton's downtown signature attributes, including?
Yeah. Sure. We could say downtown Littleton's.
Downtown Littleton, sure.
Yeah.
That's right, because we'll do the same thing for Littleton Boulevard. Right?
I think be consistent with whatever we're going to be calling this character area, right? Isn't it like there's downtown and then there's, I mean, this is all going to tie back into sort of zoning eventually, right? Downtown and then downtown transitional. What's the big overarching descriptor? Maybe it is just downtown.
This really is just downtown. We're just looking at the area between the railroad tracks and the Platte River is what we're looking at here on this exercise.
The abbreviation that was used in that map that they presented last time we were around DT zone, I think was the designation for that area.
Yeah, and we're kind of looking at, you know, railroad tracks, Santa Fe, Main Street, and Little's Creek. So that Alamo south on to Little Creeks, and we're saying that is part of the historic downtown. It's not transition at that point. So, and just Andrea, since you're typing, I see typo, bookend design of Main Street, Main and Street should be initial caps. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Editing, et cetera, will happen afterwards. Somebody's got to go over this and
Yeah, we don't, yeah.
clean it up.
But, since I just saw it, why not fix it?
Right. Sure.
I have a question. I certainly don't want to dispute the connection to our agricultural past. I'm just trying to figure out what that means in this context. We're talking about preserving and capitalizing on our agricultural past. What kind of outcomes could that lead to? I'm trying to figure out what that means. And
well, like I say, it's weaker than the relationship to the Platte River. I'll admit that. I'm thinking specifically of the silo there, the grain elevator. That's probably the only piece left. What do you think, Rick? It's not much else.
You could argue the Richard Little House as well.
Okay.
And some of the buildings on Main Street are really old. You wouldn't know that they're from the agricultural past, though.
Yeah, they've been remodeled, re-facaded. It's gone. The bones are there, but it's long gone.
Any building that was in existence before 1920 is part of our agricultural past, because we were an agricultural city up until that point. And that's a lot of buildings. That's 24 buildings on Alamo Street, on Main Street, and 10 buildings on Alamo Street. So, I mean, Littleton is pretty amazing, the amount of stuff we have. We're lucky we had several recessions. We didn't tear everything down.
Benign neglect.
So help me understand the first bullet point as it relates to, when I walked Alamo Street, I felt unsafe because the traffic was fast, the sidewalks were narrow, there were missing teeth, missing developments. Are we saying, is that the historic fabric? I don't think it is. So how much of this are we suggesting to preserve? Because to me, parts of Alamo didn't feel very good.
That's the next step, I think, Dan. I mean, we're looking at the overall character. We're not going to say we're not going to have development here. We know we have to have infill. There already has. But we have to recognize that there's a lot of integrity there. It does feel sort of unsafe just because of the way the traffic is. But walking across the bridge, Alamo Bridge, going up to Vita is really unsafe too. Mm-hmm. It has more probably to do with the fact that people are accelerating with noise behind you and you're in a tighter space. But it's not any more noisier than Main Street is during rush hour when you're on it. Main Street, you feel a little safer because you have a lot of parking on both sides that kind of protect you from the middle of the street. It was 3 lanes at one time, now it's only 2. So they really, the city removed the traffic away from those buildings in the late 1990s when they widened the sidewalks and took out that lane. I think it just has to do with just the way the 2 streets are. They're so very different in character. One's really more rural country-like than Main Street is, just because of the trees. And yeah.
I have a question. Well, how does this relate to zoning regulation that we are, or our objectives? How we go from this, defining intact historical fabric, to come in and formulate the zoning regulations or guidelines or protocols? What's the bridge here? Maybe I'm missing something.
Historic preservation is a land use action. It is defining how you're going to manage a particular area of land within an area. It is a zoning issue, basically. You're defining land use.
Yeah, no, Rick, I understand that.
Land use.
My question is, with all this wording here, how that bridge to what the task in hand? We can write whatever we want. How do you take this and formulate a strategy? I'm missing that. And I think we need to define that strategy, how this is used as a tool to modify the land use.
So if I can jump in here, I think there's going to be multiple uses of these statements. As you know, and I mean, you have mentioned this, Bizad, we do have like kind of the downtown area, the DT, and then we're going to have different character areas. So one of the things I can see KKC doing is as they describe each of those character areas, they would have a statement that is applicable to that specific character area that they would be able to pull from these 3 pages. So that's one aspect of it. So that would happen in this phase 2 part. Then we're also going to have, as part of the ULUC, we are rolling in the Historic Preservation Code. The Historic Preservation Code is very outdated at this point, and a lot of the content that you're now seeing in these 3 pages can then be integrated into how that Historic Preservation Code is written and set up.
I understand that, but for example, intact historical fabric of Alamo and Main Street. Give me an example, what kind of language you're going to use from that sentence.
And that was part of my question in the word, when we say intact, are we implying with intact that means nothing new can go there?
Exactly.
Or what I think we're getting at there is that there is a historical fabric that exists, and anything that occurs on the street that is quote unquote new needs to reflect that historic fabric.
So what I'm getting at, if we are going to give this document as a guideline to a consultant, are we interjecting a policy for a land use that is basically not well defined, is based on series of words that the group of people agreed to, doesn't mean anything unless we can define what is the strategy from this basically bullets. How does this going to translate? What's the formula? What's the guideline? What's the roadway? And I think unless you define the roadway and where we're going, then we can use this to basically load the vehicle that go down that road. Right now, these are very broad policy statements that will impact a lot of the zoning if we are not careful.
I think that's true. And that's what historic preservation is. And that's why people designate historic areas all over the country, is to control and manage the land use. And
no, maybe you don't, I get the historical. You don't get what I'm saying. I'm saying this is fine, historical. How this defined, give me an example, intact historical fabric of Alamo and Main Street. How does translate to modification of existing codes?
My thought is that you mentioned that these are broad statements, and they are. Our intent is not to give specific instructions that needs to be incorporated into a zoning plan. We're not rewriting zoning, and we're not we're not even doing the work of the consultants that they're doing in downtown. This is kind of broad brush, big picture input to them. And they are, our hope is that they will use this to help inform some of the work and the recommendations that they are giving.
I caution that this needs to be taught very carefully, step by step. And I see a lot of stuff in here that basically going to impact the zoning that we are working on. And I think some of these are very loosely stated and will change how the zoning going to change. So we need to be very careful. I know this is broad brush, but at the same time, these are given as an instruction to a consultant. We are directing them. So I like this document to be rewritten and passed through everybody and redlined a couple of times before we give it to the consultant.
I agree with the redlining and circulating it once it's been updated and corrections and circulate it back to both our the board and commission, and then we'll look at it one more time. When does it have to go to the consultant? What's your timeline?
As soon as
Jennifer?
possible.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, there's multiple parts of this timeline. You know, we have promised the public the July 1st draft of the phase 2 red line of our existing code. So how much of this statement makes it into that phase 2 red lines depends on when we get that to them. But where I really see this having the biggest input is in the ULUC downtown block.
Yeah. So we're looking at a couple of days. You know, can you get this out in a couple of days? You know, tomorrow with these corrections?
I think at the end of this evening, we have to see where the comfort level is.
Okay. And then I see, you know, the heavy lifting is going to be when we change the when we get into the nitpicky zoning, the zoning part of the land use code, and we're talking, you know, heights, setbacks, character, this, that, and then but you have to have, and then you can cross check it and go back to our general statements here and see if they're reasonable.
That cross checking is important.
So you know, this document is not, we're not talking heights, we're not talking how many buildings on Alamo are going to be saved or raised, none of that. These are just broad, as somebody mentioned, Kim, broad-based, broad brush statements. Are they broad enough, but get to the point? Do they really, what's the word, hone in on what we want for our downtown area? That's I think the important thing to talk about tonight.
Andrea, go back up to the top of the document. What was the title of this thing?
There really isn't a title.
Character statement. No, you just passed it.
You have more directives, and that's basically a strong word. If you go back down, it says directives.
Yeah, character statements and directives.
So you are giving directive to the consultant.
We can eliminate the word directive.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. It's character statement. Okay. And this character statement is a statement derived from citizens of Littleton of how we view our community.
Right.
It ties back into the vision plan, which ties back into all the small town character the wording that our community said we liked about Littleton. All we're doing is emphasizing a little bit more because we've never looked at the downtown in this detail ever.
Rick, would it be fair to say character statements and priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can. I mean, this has a way to go. When I thought about this and how to get people to see what the downtown area character is, it was really at the 30,000 square foot level.
Yeah.
And if someone were to buy a property in Littleton and read this, they would know that they wouldn't come in and put a Walmart downtown. They wouldn't even attempt to propose it because they know it would be going against what our community feels like. It's just another layer of more detail, more intimate detail than we've been able to get from the vision planning process so far. And
more content.
Pardon?
I said more. It's more detail, but it's more content.
More content, yes. I mean, we always talk about small town character. We don't know what it is. Now we're trying to define what it is in here, but also how we can allow the city to continue to grow, what we would allow it to do, what is important to downtown.
Right.
And just broad statements to fit into the whole process that we have.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It does affect the way you define land use areas.
Right.
And these are broad statements, and they're getting to that community character, that community feel. And, you know, that's the input that we're providing. And it's the consultant's responsibility to take that and combine it with all of the other inputs that they've received and the directions that they're given and their expertise to come up with a plan that can then be vetted by the whole community.
And we're not just talking about buildings in this document. We're talking about the whole downtown character based on how the Urban Land Institute defines community character. And architecture and historic preservation are just two items of many items that define the downtown character. The built fabric's important, but there's also all the other stuff that defines downtown, including restaurants, the walking, the events that we have downtown.
Yeah, I see that as a bullet that's missing here too, is downtown as a destination for community gathering, shopping, entertainment. That's an attribute that we can build on.
We do have that later on. Mark had made that nice statement. I think we need to probably go through the whole thing, and because when you read the whole thing in context, it really brings it together. We're really getting focused on just a couple words here, but when you look at the broad statements and all the words, it provides a better view of how the downtown's being looked at.
Yeah, there's a lot of information in the document, so we don't need to put every single thing in the preserve and capitalize statement. So let's go ahead and scroll a little bit down to historic downtown Alamo Main Streets can accommodate additional height, mass, and density if done thoughtfully and correctly, acknowledging and preserving existing character. So let's move up or scroll, continue to scroll so we see some of the bullet points.
By the way, if you can move that statement down so it's on the correct page as the bullet points.
Well, that's just a word thing. We're not worried about that tonight.
It'll help us see it though, Kim. Help us see it on the page when we're looking at it right now.
There you go.
Just zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
That's good.
So, and obviously typo on emphasis, but it should be emphasized pedestrian and vehicle focal points throughout the downtown, along streets, alleyways, and from gateways. And then new development must accommodate the traditional and new Littleton cultural events and encourage these events to expand throughout the downtown areas. And that's Western Welcome Week, it's, Criterium, any of the, tree lighting stuff, and festivals that we may have in the future that we haven't even imagined yet, but just community gathering.
What do you mean by downtown areas plural? Isn't it just the downtown area?
Yes.
Yeah, we could just say downtown area, that's fine.
Why we are not consistent and use the zoning designations, DT zone?
Those are proposed, right?
Well, we voted on those, right?
It's a matter of how you define transition. I find it as anything goes.
Well, DT, but that's referring to the DT kind of downtown area. And again, that's good feedback. I've noted that, Bizad. And when you have the draft in front of you, in terms of the actual phase 2 red lines, definitely make that comment as well.
Thing that stuck out to me from this one was done thoughtfully and correctly acknowledging seems like it could be really subjective, and zoning doesn't really work if it's subjective. So is there more specific terms that we can use other than thoughtfully and correctly?
Personally, I'd get away from specificity just because this isn't a zoning document.
I agree.
Yeah.
If I was the zoning code consultant, I would say, I don't know what you mean by thoughtfully. Like, does that mean?
Well, on the top of your document, say planning commission. So it's a both historical preservation and planning. So it's a joint document, and in a spirit of cooperation, I think we need to consider changing those.
Oh, yeah, that's totally fine. If you want to strike that language completely, that's fine.
Yeah, and I don't like the vehicle focal points because I think we shouldn't really emphasize downtown from a vehicle. I like to see less emphasis on traffic and any kind of traffic through downtown because we have issues with sidewalk width and those need to be changed. So emphasis to vehicle focal point to me is not relevant to this document, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to ask what a vehicle focal point was, or
Yeah,
if there
we
are
can-
examples downtown.
Yeah, I can give all kinds of examples. You drive down Littleton Boulevard and you look at the Carnegie Library.
That's more of a pedestrian focal point. That gives you the time to experience the Carnegie Library if you're on foot.
When you enter downtown from Prince Street, coming from the south, you're coming in, and that's a vehicle focal point into the city. The city's created gateways intentionally at Prince and Santa Fe, and at Bowes and Santa Fe as vocal points because you arrive by vehicle. We're just saying it because a lot of people arrive by vehicle. So there's things you can do to incite and interest someone far away if you can see it as you're driving.
Yeah, sort of like Vita serves as a focal point on Alamo.
It does. It creates a boundary.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, how you approach a city is really important. And that view from Bowes Avenue across Santa Fe into downtown is very enticing for our city. There's no other city around that has that with all that historic fabric sitting there. You know there's something there when you're standing at that light. Most people are turning north, but when you're going forward, you know something's there. Besides a sharp curve and the bend and getting through Alamo.
But it doesn't say, it's a true downtown, and this is talking about DT zone. So we are not talking about Littleton Boulevard.
Correct.
Main Street and Alamo.
Correct, that's a DT zone.
Alamo is right now the DT zone.
I want to clean up the first bullet point. It's kind of sloppy. Should read, emphasize pedestrian and vehicle focal points throughout downtown streets, alleyways, and gateways.
Mm-hmm.
Could you strike pedestrian and vehicle and just say emphasize visual focal points?
Exactly.
I was about to say visual. Good one.
Get rid of the after before downtown, throughout downtown streets. Now do that first.
Wait,
It was emphasize visual focal points throughout, and then Mark will chime in with the other one there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Throughout. Get rid of the word "the" after throughout. There you go. Get rid of that. There you go.
Not to wordsmith.
Bingo.
Visual and focal mean the same thing.
We didn't hear you, Lisa.
Not to wordsmith, but I'm pretty sure you can't have a focal point that isn't visual, so it's kind of redundant. But
Great catch. In tactile focal points. Okay. All right.
Somebody mentioned the thoughtfully and correctly. I don't know if you'd consider changing thoughtfully and correctly to contextually acknowledging preserving existing character.
And density, if Bruce, give me that language.
If done contextually, acknowledging and preserving existing character.
How about another word than contextually? That's a little.
I'm open to suggestions.
I'll get my pocket thesaurus out.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at that, all I think about is the last two webinars that were presented on Alamo Street, where the first one went with the existing zoning, which allowed 4-story buildings. And Kenneth Keenan showed all those buildings going on the street. then there's a reaction and they reduce the size of them. But part of the urban land code is going to have examples of designs that we think are going to be nice downtown. And they're going to show them on the street. Like this area could put this building in there. So this document's a little above that, in conjunction with what they're going to be showing in the visual land use code, where they're going to have examples of kind of buildings we want.
So, Rick, to you, describe what thoughtfully and correctly is to you.
I don't know. You know, any architect will say they know what it is, but they have to see it first.
So yeah, I mean, what does everybody else think thoughtfully and correctly means?
So part of it might be if you put addition on a building, you step it back. You follow preservation guidelines. So the second level, you would step it back so you can preserve that streetscape. Perhaps, if necessary, you save the facade of a building to maintain that historic character, but then you still allow a new building behind it. Thoughtfully and correctly may not be the right word. You know, the consultants may have better ideas on words because they work with communities all around the country. That's why we wanted to give it to them, let them kind of put this out. But right now, there is no thoughtful design going on downtown, is there? That's why we're doing this whole process.
Right.
That's why we're concerned about what's happening on the north side of Main Street, all the way.
Why can't we just simplify the whole sentence so that it says, can accommodate additional height, mass, and density while acknowledging and preserving existing character?
Or we could say, if done with sensitivity and acknowledges and preserves existing character.
I like the first one better, Mark. Otherwise, we have to have architecture police.
Yeah.
Laura, could you say that again?
Well, you know, if you just took out if done contextually and just put in while,
yeah,
it becomes very simple.
Let's do it.
Wow. Okay. While acknowledging and preserving existing.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
That's better.
Yeah, I agree. And with respect to Bezod, who I'm not seeing on the screen at this point, but I really don't think we ought to put DT zone in here. This isn't a zoning document per se. And we'll get to that, but I mean, I think this is broader than a given zone.
Yeah, and that district could change down the road, and what does that mean in the future? Yeah.
Right.
Now, we're not going to talk CA, we're not going to talk DT, we're not going to talk R5, so.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, and these words, again, really come from the feedback that people gave on the tour. We tried to use the words that people were using. And if we don't like them, we can obviously change them, but that's the genesis of it.
Sure.
And then somehow I don't think this paragraph is going to survive. Be intentional, not uniform in design standards. Don't settle. Ensure that citizens and developers understand that historic preservation is a vital economic interest. Insist on good design and quality materials.
What does that word be intentional? What does that mean?
I think uniform design standards can be very intentional.
Yeah, right.
The thought, this comment, the individual who made that comment, that person's, what I think that they were saying is don't let it just happen. Don't let basically one development plan on top of another development plan and all of them just kind of go down the street. Look at it as an entire entity and understand what you want for that street or that block or whatever it might be. But so be intentional in what you want to have developed there, what kind of development that you want. And then you don't need, it doesn't need to be uniform. You can have different kinds, different architectural styles. and even very modern in with historical. I think that was in the context of the conversation that that individual made that comment.
You just say intentional, say creative. The word intentional doesn't have any meaning to me.
Yeah, they're all subjective. Every single word is subjective, and we can just completely ditch it or.
Well, Andrea, the way you just described it to me seems like you're wanting developers to be holistic and consider the effect of one development or one plan on the entire downtown, right? Can we just say that?
Yeah, holistic is a good word. It certainly describes it. Is that a word we're comfortable with?
Right. You could be strategic, but what I'm hearing is consider the entire entity of downtown while not necessarily trying to make everything the same. So keep the architectural diversity, but
I would say avoid cookie cutter design and be creative, something like that, positive, while keeping up with historical characteristic of that downtown area. Just simple word like that, rather than not uniform in design standard, which I don't understand. Design standards are very specific, so they have to be uniform.
Yeah, by their very nature, they are in fact. Correct. If you have design standards, you are looking for some kind of uniformity.
So I think the intention was not being cookie cutter, everything looked the same. They want architectural creativity that is within certain guidelines. And that's what we want to say there.
You want diversity still.
Yeah, diversity, creativity.
We want developers to look at the whole area, not just the piece of land that they're putting their building on, like Amy was saying.
Yeah, include that. That's a good idea.
And the holistic is a good word there that Amy said. That maybe we can get rid of intentional and talk about, consider, be holistic in how we consider.
If you want a good example of a building we settled on, Main Street Apartments. I mean, that came in late. There'd been no economic development for 30 years in downtown, and we just took it. And I'm sure nobody views that as one of their most favorite architectural buildings in Littleton. So we don't want to settle for Main Street Apartments anymore. We want really good design that fits in and provides care, and new design adds to the new character of our city.
I do like including "don't settle." So I know that we took that out here. But I do.
That's a good one.
Well, you took that out. So put that paragraph, that sentence back in.
I think that.
Yeah, I like that sentence you just took out.
Well, with some changes. Can you put it back in?
She just did. Or she's doing it
there.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think that sentence very important.
Yeah, just to the point. Don't settle.
Is vital to everyone's economic interest.
Yeah,
I'm always saying to developers, do it right, and you'll make a lot more money than if you do it poorly. It's obvious, but some of them just want to put up something, and they can make a lot more money if they do it right.
But that economic interest statement is kind of the reason we're doing this whole exercise in the first place.
Yeah.
So add economic interest to everyone.
I will add emphasis diversity and creativity while maintaining existing characteristics.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
I like that.
I mean, creativity.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
What can you say? Diversity, creativity?
No comma there.
Diversity and creativity.
There you go.
And I think the citizen and developers, we should say stakeholders, because it might be more than developers. It might be a staff. It might be visitors, tourists, whoever. Yeah, stakeholders. Ensure that the stakeholders understand.
So eliminate citizens and developers and just say stakeholders.
Yeah, I kind of, when you bring citizen and developers, you kind of putting people against each other. So
yes,
just a stakeholder.
That's a good word,
Everybody.
stakeholders.
We're all stakeholders. I like that.
We're all stakeholders, one way or another.
I like that. And then the insist on good design and quality materials. We heard that from several people, that you look around and, you know, there's a lot of just poor design that has gone into the city recently, and very poor materials. And, you know, that came up several times.
I think that good design is another pretty subjective term. Quality materials, I can see you could make that more objective in a zoning code. You can say 40% of each facade needs to be, you know, one of these 5 materials that we consider to be high quality. But good design is so many different things to so many different people, and that one seems a lot more subjective to me. And I don't feel like we're really providing the consultant with direction by saying, give us good design.
Well, I don't understand good design. Who decides what's a good design or what's a bad design? It's very subjective. And quality material, what's a quality material? That concrete is better than steel? No, it depends on the architect. So I will use the word sustainable building material.
Well, sustainable building materials could be galvanized corrugated paneling. So I don't think that's sustainable is a good word here.
Maybe it could just be.
Well, it can be many new products that are sustainable, energy saving, environmentally friendly.
But this
we want to basically emphasize we want to be environmentally friendly.
This is a broad brush statement here. I don't think it needs. We don't need to start calling out different materials.
And I don't mind subjectivity in a broad brush. And it you know, basically the entire document is subjective in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's a problem when you're giving that kind of broad brush.
I agree with you, Kim. I think this communicates pretty clearly that we have high standards.
Yeah. There you go.
By the way, before the word stakeholders, put all, ensure that all stakeholders understand.
So what's a quality material?
Brick over stucco. I mean, brick over a stucco covered foam that's on Main Street, or even real brick versus glue on brick, like on the Main Street apartments.
But yeah, that's your definition. Is there somewhere the definition that say that?
Well, down the road, yeah, there's going to be materials that aren't going to be allowed.
Yeah.
Well, why we don't say material within the guidelines?
I think
compliance material or compliant material.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Quality material to me is like good concrete versus bad concrete.
I wouldn't try to parse things here. I would just take this as a statement that we've got high standards for these projects.
Well, why we don't say that? We have high standards.
We haven't had high standards. We want high standards.
Yeah.
I look at developments around Denver that have high standards, and it's amazing how those communities look. Littleton hasn't done it. That's why we're going through this whole comp plan process, because we haven't updated comp plan in 45 years. So, but it is, like Amy's saying, this is a broad statement to give it a sense, just like the envision statement. This is how the community feels about our downtown. We want to approach it this way.
Yeah, I think it's a 3-page document on purpose. It's not a 25-pager.
Yeah.
Well, I think the ones we've already talked about are character statements, and this one is a purpose statement. That's the difference, because there's a very different tone in this one. Like including "don't settle" is very different than like whatever we've been talking about, the bookend design of Main Street, blah blah blah.
We could take this and take this paragraph and put it at the end of the document, if we like the paragraph.
Well, paragraph is much improved. Once we go through this whole thing, you can shove it over to the end or in the beginning, however you want. it's a good paragraph that needs to be punched up.
The consultant probably would be able to do this much quicker for us when they look at the whole broad intent.
Yeah.
Compared to how they've looked at other communities as well. So
we have to allow them to earn their money. We're not going to do all their work for them. We want to give them a broad statement.
So this isn't published verbatim. Then they'll be moving around paragraphs and consolidating, and
they might do something completely different. But we're just providing input. We're not demanding. We're not trying to win the Pulitzer here, and we are not demanding that this be carved in stone.
No, well, heck with the Pulitzer, but I think a lot of these are demands, quite frankly. They're not the drivers. They're the chauffeurs. We're the drivers.
Yeah. That's true. We are.
It'll be carved in stone, but maybe not granite, but sandstone.
Okay. So
but quality materials.
Quality materials.
Good God, Rick. I don't know. Take a break, Rick.
Stone tablets.
Jennifer, is this okay? We tell the consultants what to do?
Again, we're providing input, and I think also this document in the future can be used for when we actually do a historic preservation plan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then let's move on to the variety of experiences as you walk the downtown streets. And the varieties are enclosure, openness, shade, sun, sidewalks, trees, building facades, windows, streetlights, people, and the proximity to the entirety of downtown contribute to a pleasant and memorable experience. And that's pretty much a direct quote from someone who was on the tour, who was on this call. So
what does enclosure mean in this statement?
Anybody have ideas what that might be?
I think it's the building placements, at least on Main Street, relative to the back of the sidewalk. So when you're walking down, you feel that wall enclosure.
Is there another word that we could use?
Yeah, it's got to be a better word.
Or just take that word out. Take it out.
Space.
Well, it's talking about, I believe, it's talking about a definition, enclosure, confinement, edge.
It's architectural terms that are used to describe experience.
Mm-hmm.
Enclosure, openness,
and enclosure can be a lot of things. It could be a fence. It could be a porch roof.
Could be a shade tree.
Shade tree could be a space between an alley.
Yeah,
it's really. It could be very intimate, a couple square feet to a couple hundred square feet. In a way, our Main Street's got an enclosure because of the bookends, and that's a big space.
And enclosure, it kind of like contrasts enclosure and openness, just like shade and sun. That those are kind of contrasts that you experience as you walk the street.
And I think the key to this is that it's a pedestrian experience.
Mm-hmm. And it's a varied experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates the pleasant and memorable experience.
First off, you walk the downtown streets. It should be a semicolon there rather than a comma.
I think actually, I would like to see an M dash there.
However,
yeah,
we need a professional editor like my wife.
Bring it, baby.
I'll pay her top dollar and have her look at this tomorrow morning.
That's right. Go for it.
You could say intimacy, like kind of intimacy right next to openness sounds like fun. Enclosure is kind of an architecture word, and I don't think a lot of people would scratch their heads.
Yeah, that's probably a better word than enclosure.
Yeah, intimacy. I do like that word.
Our audience for this is the zoning code consultants, who I think will understand what enclosure means.
Yeah, but But if they use that same word and it goes out to the public, then it's not good.
Right, that's my point.
We're the drivers.
You've never seen me drive, Mark.
Stay off the road. Okay. Okay. Yeah, both intimacy and then openness. You can see the sky downtown, but you're close to two-story buildings with a setback third level. You go from this to that.
The yin and the yangs.
Yeah. One of the things that struck us as we walked through there was the tendency of people to gravitate toward shady areas or places where there are trees or some sort of enclosure where you feel a little bit protected from the street and from the sun.
You just used a good word, enclosure. Maybe that's a better word than intimacy.
So we just have
enclosure. Enclosure is very broad. It offers a lot of stuff.
I like intimacy.
I can get my head around intimacy. That makes sense.
All right.
Okay, now
I don't think that really captures the feeling of feeling of containment, though, that you described, of the buildings along the street.
There's a better word out there. We just haven't thought of it yet.
Yeah. Or
I don't know. If you use a safety factor or a comfort factor that happens when all of these things work together. Like as a pedestrian, you feel safe when a building is close by. That I think safety or comfort is what it's bringing up.
There actually is some physical protection from the buildings and the trees that from wind and sun, and so and it provides a feeling of safety
and noise.
I will add word of enjoyable environment.
That's not subjective. Some people don't think it's enjoyable to be downtown.
Well, they don't go downtown then.
Well, we could change the word pleasant to enjoyable.
Pleasant. Intimacy. I like the word enclosure. It's an architectural term. This is a zoning that this is going to be going on top of our land use planning document, and it means a lot of things architecturally. And we can have enclosures. We have multiple enclosures within a building, within an area, within a park. You can have multiple enclosures within a park. It's how you define empathy. And like Dan mentioned the last time, he pointed up the pattern language. This is stuff that comes out of the pattern language when you look at how people use spaces, from small spaces to very large spaces.
Well, maybe it's not either or, maybe it's both and. Intimacy, enclosure, openness.
Does it help mainstream it a little bit more if you say a sense of enclosure or some other kind of phrase that gives people an idea?
I like a sense of enclosure.
Sense of enclosure. Okay, that's that.
And then maybe get rid of intimacy.
There you go. So we came up with a better word, a better phrase. Okay.
Great. I love it.
Beautiful.
Okay, done.
All right.
And Rick gets to keep his architecture ease. Okay.
I think, Okay, moving along. Preserve Alamo Street. Alamo best expresses, not express, expresses the town's, and that should be possessive, character and mix of uses, including residential, commercial, government, manufacturing, institutional, and fraternal. Alamo represents the most original and authentic area of Littleton, with buildings dating from the 1890s to the 1980s. Are we for it or against it?
This goes back to
the city's character. We're not a town, we're a city.
We are technically a city.
This just goes back to at what point are we preserving Alamo Street?
Yeah.
because if we don't feel safe, there's ways to make it feel safer. So I guess that's my question. If, you know, and if you weigh potential economic opportunities and wanting to increase tax base or whatever, there's opportunity to do that there. So I guess I don't understand what preserve Alamo Street means.
I don't think the word preserve belongs right there. Further down, you talk about allow infill. Preserve is pretty definitive statement. Get rid of the word preserve. Just say Alamo Street. Then boom.
Yeah.
The rest of the paragraph is pretty decent.
Seems
Yeah,
like
preserve Alamo Street, it feels like a bridge too far, doesn't it? That's not what we want to do.
Yeah,
it seems like this could be.
I think kind of the unique thing about Alamo, I don't know that it's necessarily the most original and authentic. I think that it tells a really interesting story of the evolution of the city, because you can tell from 1890s to 1980s, and it's not necessarily that it's the original and authentic part of Littleton. It's that you're seeing an authentic evolution of the city, and part of that authentic evolution probably in the future is additional infill and redevelopment and buildings that look like they were built in 2020. I think that's what the crux of Alamo Street is.
So well, that's true. That's true, Lisa, because the ACC building is one of those buildings. But if you look at the buildings, if you look at the buildings individually and how they've been modified, they are the most authentic that we have, because there has been no development on that street. Now, it doesn't mean that we save them like a museum, but we recognize that the buildings are a character, and there's many ways to do development around historic buildings to maintain that character.
So it might just be a matter of saying has some of the most original buildings in Littleton. It's not the most original and authentic area.
I think it is more so than any place else in Littleton. If you look at all of Littleton's development, all the resources, maybe the houses in the middle are more authentic than Alamo Street is, but we're not going to be saying the same thing about them. If we were to eliminate Alamo Street, what would downtown look like going through it? It would be so different. It'd be incredibly different on that feel. And there's only one or two buildings, but the buildings that are there represent Littleton's incredible past. That's one thing to keep in mind.
Is this maybe a good location where it represents the architectural continuum from the beginning to the end? And so maybe that's where some of that language would come in, that it, rather than saying most original and most authentic, that it represents that continuum.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I guess I don't think that whatever the 3 or 4 surface parking lots that I think of on Alamo are reflective of original and authentic.
No, but we're not talking about the parking lots, talking about the buildings.
It's the built environment.
But it says the area.
Yeah.
And it is the built environment, which the parking lots are very much a part of the built environment. I don't think they parked wagon trains in those parking lots. So that's a good point. I might be wrong.
I had a question regarding manufacturing. What kind of manufacturing is in Alamo Street?
The area, especially right off of Alamo Street, if you just continued on the blocks between Alamo and Little's Creek, there's a lot of manufacturing spaces. And I don't know all of the stuff that they built there, but I know that Heckathorn, which is a big manufacturer in Littleton, that Heckathorn was on the corner that is now occupied by ACC. That's Prince and Alamo. And then Curtis, one block down from Alamo, has the Coleman Motors, which was a big manufacturing facility in the 30s and 40s in Littleton.
So this is the way this reads. It reads that right now we have manufacturing there.
Oh, we do. That's existing. And
In Alamo, I don't think there is any manufacturing in Alamo itself.
Yeah, on Alamo. I mean, it's
Not on Alamo.
probably
So
just
if the Alamo Street,
right.
there's no
There's no
manufacturing on Alamo itself.
No, there's not.
Okay, so that's misleading, that manufacturing.
Yes.
all right. Take it out.
No, let's expand it Alamo Street to Little's Creek, because Little's Creek had a railroad spur that went down there to service those buildings. It ties into the Columbine Mill, which is part of that as well.
Could we change, instead of saying Alamo expresses, could we say Alamo depicts the evolution of the city's character?
Represents.
Or represents, yeah.
Represents.
Yeah, that's fine.
By the way, who snuck in the word continuum? What the hell does that statement mean?
I think that was Kim.
No, that's Chris.
No, it's the person doing the editing. No.
No, it's Chris. It's brilliant.
No,
Architectural
it's not.
continuum.
I
It
heard
is a continuum.
I heard continuum, but I didn't hear the second half of the sentence, so I know it's a messed up sentence.
So we have
Something
architectural continuum of Littleton.
Yeah,
So we
original
lose.
I thought was coming out.
Yeah, lose. Or yeah. Yes. There you go.
There we go.
All right. Well,
Okay,
So
now we've
you-
used
yeah.
Alamo represents twice in that paragraph.
Yeah, especially if we just talked about Alamo Street to Little's Creek. Do you say like this district represents the evolution, or this sub area or area? Rather than referring to Alamo directly, we just expanded it.
Yeah.
This area represents.
Yeah, you said it twice.
Yeah. So use another word besides represents. You have
Depicts.
Yeah, depicts.
Constitutes.
Expresses.
Flex.
Illustrates.
Shows. Illustrates.
Epitomizes, if you want to go that far.
Yeah. Illustrate.
Constitutes.
Yeah.
Like a living thesaurus.
here we go.
Nice.
Do we want to say this area instead of Alamo right here?
I believe so, because we're referring to manufacturing.
Yes.
and then
Yes.
location. This area represents the architectural continuum, yada, yada, yada.
Is there?
And Mark, if your wife is editing this and she comes up with a better word, let her put it in there.
Oh, she'll slice this thing up, guaranteed.
Go for it. Go for it.
Of course, you're doing it for free, so
I love how you're volunteering her. So that's awesome.
everybody put $20 in the pot, and she'll help.
Yeah. Excuse me, Sherry. Should manufacturing be industrial or something? Isn't that light industrial in there? I know you mentioned manufacturing, but we talked about that as an area that is maybe conducive to some light industrial. And that Denver machine tool is that street along there, Curtis, might be a prime area for some expansion around that.
Yeah, that's the old Coleman Motors weld shop.
Right.
Question for Jennifer: is this current zoning allow industrial zone in that area?
No.
Okay, so I will be very careful about using both industrial. I would say commercial.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was some industrial. We don't have any zoning that's industrial. Okay.
Now, why don't we like the word manufacturing?
Because that's considered industrial land.
It's industrial.
This isn't a zoning document. It's historically was there.
That's what they're
It
doing.
is there now in some cases.
Okay,
Yeah,
you
they're
can say
manufacturing stuff.
historically manufacturing or industrial use.
Historic industrial.
Well, I think
The other ones are still allowable uses. So that softens the industrial.
Well, and a big part of the character too is that you could have a use such as manufacturing if it doesn't look like smokestacks and something that would be in a true industrial park.
Right.
Yeah, I really prefer the word manufacturing there, because that, manufacturing can and does go on there.
And are we talking about light manufacturing, or is there some other qualifier that helps people feel more comfortable?
I think the word historic is comfortable enough.
And manufacturing happens today, only we call them makers. We call it maker space, but it's really manufacturing space.
Somebody with a pottery shop is manufacturing on a small scale. Okay.
But those are commercial mainly. They are not really manufacturing by definition.
Great.
But commercial is also, a business. Retail is commercial use.
Yeah.
Offices.
But, artists that produce, let's say, portrait. That's say they manufacture portrait, but really that's a commercial business. Pottery is a commercial business. The word manufacturing is like a car manufacturing to most of the people. So that it has a negative. And you don't want this to go to public and say, okay, now they're going to include manufacturing there.
Right. Or industrial for that matter. So
we are talking about historic uses.
And cars were manufactured there.
The building as a manufacturing building, but that may not be the right thing to do here. We can do that other ways, because that building could be turned into a restaurant or anything else. Right. It's the building that we're talking about more than the use or what the zoning allows on that particular site. I don't even know what the zoning would allow on that site. Maybe it's not even correct anymore.
We are talking about historical uses, right?
Yes.
Right.
Isn't that clear?
Why we don't say the historical usage of this area included?
There it is.
That way it's kind of precise.
Historically, and then I would ditch, manufacturing. I would just say manufacturing and lose the word historic before. Yeah, perfect.
That's much better.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, and let's scroll down or up. Allow infill development of surface parking lots adjacent to streets. Parking should be to the rear, underground, or otherwise hidden. And that statement was pretty much all around the downtown area. While a surface lot exists.
When a surface lot exists.
Yeah, it exists today. I think the goal is to eliminate those surface lots at some point. But when a surface lot exists, incorporate landscaping and separation from the sidewalk with low barrier that meets design standards.
With a low barrier?
Yeah, a low barrier.
So is this implying that somebody that has an existing surface lot is going to need to come in and landscape it according to this? Because as you said,
or would they be grandfathered in?
That's a good question.
In most places,
I think if they change it, in other words, if they start charging for parking, or if they put up, some sort of improvement there, they restripe it even, it would make them subject to that requirement.
Most of the city, if you do any kind of modification, retrofitting, you have to come to the codes at that point. Mm-hmm. So this is very similar approach. If you have a surface parking lot and you modify it, then you need to come to code.
Okay.
We have typically taken a little bit of a softer approach, because if somebody wants to make a minor modification that would be better for the city, we don't necessarily require that they come up to code, which could be hugely expensive for them.
I think that contradicts the previous thing. Be assertive.
Don't settle.
Don't settle.
Well, that's right. That some people will walk and not do anything. That's the problem.
But I guess an example of what you're talking about is if a parking lot's restriped to add ADA spaces, for example, then the city would not require a complete reconfiguration of the parking lot.
That's correct.
An addition of landscape islands, Yeah.
But if you reconfigure and, for example, dedicate the rest of it to a building, and now you have used half of that, then you need to bring it to code.
Okay, let's give it a shot. With a low, put the word a in there. And then there we go. Get that. A low landscaped or fence barrier. You could do it using both a fencing or landscape or both, either or both.
But they have Bradford Auto Body has both, and it looks very nice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, that helps. Well, the building right next to it, to the east.
I think what people were seeing here was you have the parking lot comes right to the sidewalk, and it just feel better to have a barrier there right now, and then for the future when people redesign or redevelop the sites.
But we are just talking.
Parking lot's going to go away if they redevelop.
Hopefully, yes.
Sure.
Hopefully.
So I guess that's where I'm confused about this sentence. It's like if you were going to modify an existing surface lot, then you have to do this sort of stuff, right? I mean, otherwise, are we saying, like I said, are we saying people have to go and bring their lots up to compliance?
It happens.
Huh?
It happens sometimes. I mean, the city could change their regulations to allow a 5-year period where you have to conform. We did that with lighting many years ago.
Okay,
The idea is, especially as you walk along Alamo, the street, if you will, leaks out, when you walk past those spaces, which contributes to that unsafe feeling. There's just no edge there. You're just at pavement when it's an empty lot. It's just open. And anything we could do to encourage there to be a street edge there, I think would benefit that experience of walking along the street and that sort of enclosure that we were talking about before.
Totally agree. If I'm an existing lot owner, what are you telling me I have to do? But Mark, you're saying the city can sometimes enforce that?
They can and have.
Yeah. Okay.
Or they don't even need that sentence, because what this is stating is what we would allow to have happen there very broadly. Then we're getting this real specific about a landscape item. Maybe we don't need to say that last sentence at all.
That's kind of where I'm going, because it's like, well, if there's future development, the parking lot, you can't have parking up front, period.
So let's just strike that when a surface lot exists sentence. Does that sound okay?
Or you could just say, except a landscape fence separation from sidewalk.
Buffer.
Or incorporate a buffer from the sidewalk.
Correct.
Okay.
Period. It doesn't even have to say meets design standards. That goes without saying.
The separation from the side, or just incorporate a buffer. Period. Does that work?
Yeah.
So no landscaping. So just when a surface lot exists, incorporate a buffer. Period.
Well, it has to be either landscape or a fence, because if not, they cannot just have a 5 feet a space that is bare. Yeah, so typically most of the cities, especially back east, you cannot have open parking unless you have an island of landscape that buffer from the sidewalk.
Incorporate a landscape or fence buffer, I think.
Yeah.
Period. Okay.
Yeah.
Get rid of the rest.
And you said something that is very important. The goal is to eliminate any future open lot parking
up against the street.
Yeah.
But if one's there, then do this.
But no, that comes later, Mark. We can write the zoning later on. For the consultants, we want to send a message that the goal that people want to see is no parking lot, surface parking lot, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
But you
So
said
I would
that.
say
It says parking should be in the rear, underground, or otherwise hidden. So you're stating that's really what you want.
Yeah, I
But
think
if a-
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of like what Dan said earlier. What the objective, what we're trying to convey to the consultants is the safety issue, that sense of a hard street edge, a buffer. I don't know which words you want to use, but maybe we just say what we mean. Is it that we're trying to make it feel safer, more walkable? And that some of these access points to parking lots right up to the edge makes you lose some of that?
Well, actually, what we're saying is that Alamo has a particular character, and we know that with all the buildings, but we're also stating that we're going to allow the existing parking lots to develop however they develop, as long as they maintain that character with the existing buildings.
But I think Andy's talking about the existing parking lots.
I know, but I'm just saying, we got the broad statement above, and what we're basically saying on Alamo Street is we will allow infill, we are encouraging and allowing infill development of those existing spaces that are undeveloped, which happen to all be parking lots, is what they are. Right now, they're all parking lots. There's no park, there's nothing else there. They're all paved. If you go back to the original statement above, and looking at the historic character of the street, what we're saying is we're going to allow buildings to go on that street to meet the historic character, and all the parking has to be off the street and future development is what we're saying.
But we're also talking about the surface lots that currently exist.
And could be grandfathered in and stay.
Yeah, make it out, separate it like that.
There we go. Oh, that's good.
Oh, good. Perfect.
They're two different things, really. One's more specific than the other.
Yeah.
So, okay, that was easy. Just make it a bullet.
Would it be safe to say under the first bullet that we already allow infill development, that we should encourage it?
We do allow it. Yeah, well,
I like encourage.
I like encourage.
Because we're giving this to the consultant, right? So they're going to write this into the.
Well, we are encouraging the downtown to be redeveloped. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I like that.
Right.
Okay, let's go down to the third bullet. Explore, if we're okay with the first two, we can go down to the third bullet and say, explore facade saving as one alternative to maintain the historic authenticity when less significant buildings are endangered with development.
That sentence is a bit awkward.
Yeah.
Saving sounds like money. It seems like it should just say preserve building facades as an alternative to something.
Okay.
Or just to maintain. It could be an alternative to redevelopment, frankly, right?
Well, I think
when possible.
The facade saving is, it's not necessarily saying that you have to preserve the facade, but, you're talking about explore that, consider that, try to do that.
Yep.
And then, acknowledge the fact that we are preserving a facade, that there's something else happening behind it that wasn't necessarily there before.
Hey, you know what they call that? It's called a façadomy. So just
the façadectomy.
Or we call it façadetecture. Okay.
So my concern is with saying, so preserve buildings facades as an alternative to maintain the historic authenticity. I don't know that authenticity is maybe the best word there, because when you do a facadectomy, you really don't have much of the historic building left at that point.
Somebody said character.
Character.
I would say when less significant buildings are
or elements,
historic elements that
you're trying to historic elements, because we're talking about character overall.
I think we should add, when possible, preserve historical building facade.
Well, as an alternative is probably good enough.
Well, take the alternative out, when possible.
I agree. Yeah.
I could see that perhaps happening at the corner of Rapp and Alamo. It is one way to maintain our small town feeling when you're a pedestrian and you're walking through and allow new development behind. It's not a most desirable way to preserve an area, but it's a way that is used in every city in the United States. And it's covered by all the preservation laws to allow.
Yes.
A way it could be clear that it's when possible and as kind of the last
resort,
ditch effort,
last
like
option.
resort is to just keep the facade.
We don't want it to be the primary way to do saving of an area like they did in Washington, D.C. in the late 70s and early 80s, where they tore everything down and built new buildings behind them.
And this is only applying to less significant buildings. So, I mean, it seems like that would apply more to significant buildings.
Well,
let's not even qualify that. Let's just say
buildings are endangered. Do we want to use that word? I know some people do, but do we want it in here?
With redevelopment. Threatened with redevelopment.
I think you're trying to, you're trying to encourage redevelopment at some level here.
Right.
Yeah,
right,
I would get rid of endangered and threatened and all of that.
Could you say are being considered for development?
Yeah.
Or being redeveloped.
Or being
just being redeveloped.
When they're being, or if they are, when they are.
Yeah, and that takes all the value judgment out of it. You're right.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good.
Actually, you said you can say to maintain the historical elements during redevelopment and eliminate the rest.
Oh, I like that actually. Does everyone else like that?
Yeah.
Okay, say it again.
Yeah.
This is a paragraph designed by a committee here. This is where did that come in? As a last option, just say when possible. Boom, that's all.
Yeah, period.
When possible, comma. When possible, forget the comma.
No, I'm gonna fight for that one. I'm sorry, I'm gonna fight for that one. That should be a last resort.
So the first resort would be demolition then?
Right.
No, last resort other than demolition.
Okay, Jason has the last word from now on. Okay. Oh, it's back in. Everybody wants it in.
I don't mind last resort because it's not a desire. Really at the end of the day, it's not super desirable. So I don't have a problem with last resort.
That'll be
the committee has decided. All right.
Lisa used the fight word. She said she'd fight for it, so we keep it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and is this, okay, so historic is a word that has a precise meaning in here, because I don't see us wanting to necessarily preserve the ACC's glorious facade or the...
Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do.
Historic is precise, and it's defined on how we designate the buildings. It is a precise word. Historic means it's absolutely determined. You could say historical here because we haven't done that yet on Alamo, but that's the plan to look at it in the future.
Yeah, but isn't that up to
historically significant? I mean, are you trying to say contributing versus non-contributing structures?
Well, sometimes not. I think we'll get to a point where everything on Alamo has been designated as contributing or non-contributing, but we don't have that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, because that would be the nice historic preservation way, precise way to define it. Yeah.
Right.
We didn't want to, we intentionally did not want to get into talking about what buildings would be designated or not on this exercise. That comes later. It's just a broad view.
Okay.
If a tornado went down Main Street, the Alamo, we wouldn't be talking about this. So it'd be all new buildings.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to maintain wider setbacks and low street-facing facades of up to 3 stories. Allow raised porches or steps. How do we feel about that?
Well, low street facing facades, and then up to 3 stories. Most people would say 3 stories and low street facing facades.
That's an oxymoron, really.
So should we just put low street facing facades, period?
Yes.
But what does that mean? Does that mean 1 story?
Some of them are 2 story.
Depending on where it's built, it's like depending on what's around it. Because, you know, if you have other 1-story buildings and you put a 3 or 4-story building in there, it's gonna really stick out versus, you know, a block of 2-story buildings and you put a 3-story building in as an infill.
Instead of the word
I don't know that we
maintain,
should
you want to say
specify.
prefer?
Why do we need to specify 3 stories or up to 3 stories?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
We don't, because we talk about building, we talk about that other places.
Yeah, I think we should eliminate that. That was just one of the things that had come up, and that was one of the comments. But I think we should just low street facing facades, period. And when you think about
it's going to be a case. It's going to be a case-by-case basis anyway when something comes in for infill in the area. And Rick, we talked about this on the walk, you know, where that parking lot was on Alamo with the view of the mill.
Right.
And that, you know, a 2-story building versus a 4-story building, you know, has a big impact versus a 4-story building on Main Street where there's already 2 or 3-story buildings, you know, in that same block. So I think there's another place in this document that talks about, you know, 4 stories, and that really raised my hackles when I saw 4 stories. I'm like, I don't know that I would want to see 4 stories anywhere around the downtown area, to be honest.
So we have them, but I agree. I think this is the point we're trying to make, is the Historic Preservation Board is saying, and the Planning Commission, when we did this, is saying, we're not opposed to development. That's really what we're saying, right? It's and how we do it, that comes later, but we're not opposed to it.
Okay.
At this time.
Also, maintain wider setbacks and low or stepped street facing facades.
I'm not sure.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
And I'm not sure what wider means in this context. Should it be maintain existing setbacks, or maintain consistency with existing setbacks?
Yeah, that's tough on Alamo because there is a variety in the setbacks. I mean, just looking at the lot lines versus the aerials, you know, the Elks building is very close to Alamo right of way. There are a couple of commercial buildings next to the Rhyolite building between Nevada and Curtis that are right on the right of way. I mean, it seems like the existing setbacks or maintaining setbacks might be more applicable on the south side of Alamo, where it's a little more residential in character, for wanting to maintain that feel with the lawns. Of course, there's an exception to that with the ACC building, but you know, I think particularly the north side of Alamo has a lot of variety.
Which adds to the interest of walking down the street. Maintain's probably not the right word.
How about prefer?
Encourage.
Well, the issue probably is the word wider more than anything else. Maybe just maintain the current setbacks that we have and allow everything, whatever comes in, to adjust accordingly.
I thought prevalent was an appropriate word, you know, maintaining prevalent. Because it does vary quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, isn't this going to contradict the setbacks that we set for downtown area? We already voted on that, and that's basically is going to be part of the zoning regulation, correct?
Again, it's, you know, the phase 2 red lines is what we're talking about now. And I don't think this document is establishing a specific setback, but more giving some guidance on it.
No, but if we're encouraging that they maintain the same setbacks, are those setbacks meeting the current criteria that we basically voted on, or?
I think
I mean, we don't want to create a condition that they say you have two different criteria here. So I think we need to be cognizant of that we have a setback already set for downtown area.
I think the word context needs to be somewhere in here.
It's like context sensitive setbacks. What do we do in Littleton neighborhood? Right? There's some variety, but what's the term for it? Context sensitive?
Yeah, so maybe maybe it's more sensitive on the south side of Alamo where the residences are, and less so on the north side where it's more commercial.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right about the side of the street. The south side does seem to be the one that has the wider setbacks.
Yeah, and then it's different as you go into the more industrial, the former manufacturing area. You know, those buildings, some of them are right on the sidewalk as well. But yeah, as a general statement, I think it's looking good.
I like context sensitive also because I think it's not just the distance from the street, the setback. It's in some cases, we're talking about the lawns, which was mentioned before, and the trees, which has been mentioned as really integral to the character of at least that first couple of blocks there. So if context sensitive gets to that, that was the only other thing I was going to mention was the lawns and the trees for at least a portion of Alamo.
Yeah, and that really does make that part of Alamo special.
Yeah, and when you look at the post office, which does have it is set back, but it will always have a fence to prevent people from going into that space for security reasons.
Don't say always.
As long as it's the post office. We don't know what will happen in the future, but.
Oh, we're going to take up a collection to improve the fence.
Yes.
No, I'm not talking about that fence. I'm talking about the front of the building.
Oh.
Not the back of the building.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Point taken.
Yeah.
Pick up a collection to replace that fence free of charge.
Okay.
Red, white, and blue, maybe.
Let's move on. If we're happy with that sentence.
Okay.
And then this is preserve low density existing residential character along street.
This is when our consultants are showing 4-story step back residential redevelopment. This sentence doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's not what the consultants are saying, but we did hear that.
Yeah. But they keep showing us pictures of the big stuff, which is kind of bothering me.
Well, they're showing pictures of the big stuff. Yeah, but what do we want?
I think that's why it's important to have this bullet point in there it seems like a lot of people in the tours recognize that the existing residential structures on Alamo were important to the character. So they're obviously not historically designated now. So giving some direction to the consultants that these are something we'd like to see saved regardless of historic designation. I think that's why it's important to have it as a bullet point.
And I agree, but the way the sentence reads, it looks like it's pointing back to it being a residential neighborhood, that we want it to be residential when in fact we want to preserve the residential buildings, don't we? I mean, they're all businesses now. They're not residences.
Well, some of them are residences. There's apartments and duplexes.
Okay.
That's where I'd recommend deleting low density, because that's typically seen as single family at a certain number of dwellings per acre. So maybe we're talking about the, kind of the existing residential buildings, particularly on the south side of the street.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jason. Low density is getting into the implementation of housing. We were looking at it in terms of volume. So we got to be careful to differentiate between those two things when we talk about this. So I would also say we don't need to say low density because it's a volume issue when you add on to the building.
So preserve existing residential buildings. Do we want to specifically say on south side of the street?
But some of those buildings on the south side, a couple of those houses have been just remodeled, lost all their historical character. They're just
one of them
run of the mill
one
houses.
Of them.
Yeah,
there's one of them certainly.
Just one of them.
Yeah, okay.
Do we
well,
want to say preserve existing, something about their historic buildings? Or is that just kind of obvious? I mean, I feel like if we're clarifying.
I think what we're thinking about here is, we have houses that are now commercial. And what comes with original houses is front yards, sidewalks, and all that. We want to kind of maintain that character, regardless of what the use is behind.
Right.
Well, don't you want to preserve the historically significant buildings on both sides of the street, not just the residential?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of many residential buildings on the north side, but
but I think you want to
house,
but it's not preserve historically significant buildings on either side of the street, whether they're residential or not.
I think that makes sense.
yes.
Do we need to specifically, though, call out what we were talking about earlier with residential buildings, not, wanting to keep the character of not having super high density residential here?
Define super high.
I guess that's where we got off track.
Well, maybe we're making the character of the street is sort of residential historically for a long time, right? When people lived on the street, we're referring back to that. That's not how the street's used right now. It may not be used either. I think the residential word is reflective of the houses on the street versus.
Right.
So how do you preserve that feeling?
The houses, the duplexes, but they are residences. Those are residential buildings.
Not.
How about residential building character? No.
Because basically what we're saying is, we're telling the consultants, those 4-story and 5-story buildings that you showed lining Alamo, we don't want that. I mean, that's kind of what this statement is saying.
We don't want it to look like Main Street either.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want Main Street on Alamo.
Let's just say those things.
Do you want to say preserve the residential feel of Alamo?
And if I heard that and I had my nice picture of a 4-story beautiful apartment building, I would say, yeah, I'm preserving the residential feel of
It's
Alamo.
residential and it feels like residential. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the massing studies, those were reasonably well received at the public outreach meeting I attended.
And they were sort of to the south of the buildings. They weren't on they weren't set back right on Alamo. They were a little bit behind, weren't they?
Well, there was some on the north side of Alamo, if I'm recalling correctly.
North side.
Yeah, I thought they were on the street myself, but.
Alamo,
right on Alamo.
They had one.
Which is, you want that density near the light rail station.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's how you design it that's, the tricky part.
I think that there's lots of opportunities, or there's several opportunities for infill on Alamo, but the point is that we're all seeing this character of these historic residential buildings that we like. So infill around that, preserve that part, but also, again, let Alamo continue to evolve.
That's right, Lisa.
So can we just go with that statement?
Yes.
Yes.
Next item.
Yes.
All right. Now this is here we are talking about what we're going to do with RTD's parking lot, but development in the RTD parking lot, which might be a thing, can create an attractive invitation into the city center for pedestrians. Is that a statement we want to have in here, or?
I would add gateway. It's not, rather than an attractive invitation, it's a gateway.
It is a gateway.
Yes.
I like that.
I would just make the statement stronger, and instead of it can create an attractive invitation,
It should.
It should.
Now.
I think it's a huge, we already talked about it as a huge opportunity, and defining characteristic of Littleton is that it's near the light rail is near the downtown. So
Yes.
we have a very unexciting arrival when you just step into that RTD parking lot.
Let's
And
make it a
maybe
directive.
And change development to develop, if we're going to do that. Develop the RTD parking lot, which is a verb versus.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Action.
Develop the RTD parking lot. Yeah, that's good.
To create. Yep.
To create.
I like to add expand, develop and expand, because the RTD parking lot right now is very small, and Arapahoe Community College have a lot of room that they don't use anymore. It's empty parking lots. So I like to see an expansion plan for the RTD parking lot.
On that site, or move it to ACC.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that makes that clear, though. That sounds like we want that lot to be bigger, which I don't think most of us really want.
No, I don't want that.
It'll just
I
go
know.
Well, what's
upwards.
the difference between the existing parking lot on Arapahoe Community College, if you take that portion and add it, is the same land use?
Or you're talking about extending the parking opportunities or something, not making that lot bigger.
Well,
we're talking
expanding
about
the RTD to existing parking lot. So using that parking lot that ATC is not using and make it RTD parking lot. Because that way in encourage, right now there is very limited parking space. We are not utilizing the RTD railroad because of the restriction on parking.
Yeah, but that is a separate bullet, it seems like. This is to deal with the RTD parking lot itself, isn't it?
Yes.
We're talking about ACC parking, which, by the way, gets very full during school.
No.
When I went to class there, it was full. Right across the street by the school. Recently, I went
last
to school.
10 years, my office oversees that parking lot. We have documented that in that back parking lot, there's 4 cars.
In the one right there on Pritt Street,
Correct.
right by the building.
Yep.
It's when I took classes there a couple years ago, it was pretty full, but obviously it's not full all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, just shared parking in general, something we've talked about for all lots. So maybe that applies there.
And also, we're not talking about redeveloping the entire RTD lot. I don't think. I think people were talking about, just the piece that's along Prince and Alamo. So I'm not sure what the plan is for that.
Yeah, I think it's more to do maybe with the crosswalk, because that's just not well defined. And that's a really visible entrance into downtown when you get off the train or you park there. That crosswalk is somewhat insignificant. It needs to be beefed up or made more attractive, perhaps. It's hard to see it, frankly, from a safety point.
About, what kind of building we want in here. We want a building in here that when you walk up those steps from the light rail, when you're visiting Littleton, and you walk past the train station, you feel excited about walking in that direction, that the building leads you to the downtown.
Right.
Urban core right there in that parking lot.
I agree.
Okay, here we go. Redevelop a portion.
I think go big. I mean, why are we going small? Let's go big. Redevelop it.
Yeah, I like that.
Right,
so take out a portion.
Just say redevelop the RTD parking lot, kind of what you had before.
Damn.
Yeah, because we don't know what it could be feasible to build a really large underground parking structure there.
Let's be aspirational.
Yeah.
We just need to bring the developer, because RTD isn't in the development business. But I think we're in the land sale business now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've done unsolicited
City can do like Boulder, do a public parking.
And instead of saying city center, wouldn't you want to say downtown?
Gateway Center or something.
Yeah, let's do it. Downtown.
Yeah.
Into just downtown.
Into downtown.
Please stop a second. This is the bad sentence. Redevelop the RTD parking lot to create an attractive gateway into downtown.
Into downtown.
For pedestrian and vehicular traffic.
Oh, vehicular.
How about just for pedestrian?
Pedestrian.
It's not just for
pedestrian, Mark.
It's not for pedestrians only. It's also for vehicles.
Yeah, they
Cars
so
that
get rid
drive off the light rail station?
It's about vehicle storage.
Vehicle storage, yeah.
It's for pedestrian traffic?
You're creating
or pedestrians, period. Yes.
How about or pedestrians and vehicles, if you have to have vehicles in there.
And pedestrian and
It is an
vehicular
attractive
traffic.
gateway.
Yeah, why is
Gateway
the
sort of is all encompassing?
yeah,
Okay, pedestrians and vehicles is fine.
yeah
So is
everything
this
after
calling?
But the vehicles don't care if it's attractive.
Most people driving west on Littleton Boulevard, they're driving, they're not pedestrians, and you create a gateway for them. That's a lot more than pedestrians.
Well,
it feels like everything after downtown is unnecessary. You could put the period there.
Yeah, I
agree. You're right.
Okay.
This is our light rail
Completely
station. The
agree.
only people coming out of here are pedestrians. It's the only place where pedestrians enter the city right
true.
now. It's the only place, nobody else.
Structured parking
No.
to bring those pedestrians to the city.
And if you get on Alamo, it's a gateway out of downtown.
Yeah. If you're coming into Alamo in your car, going west on Alamo, you're in trouble. So you ought not be doing that.
Are you asking for structured parking? Is that what you mean by redeveloping it?
I don't know what would go there.
Structured parking in conjunction with a building.
Okay.
Building.
It's a primary site for mixed-use development is what it really is. And we should, and the city's talking about that at our two light rail stations. This is the only place where pedestrians enter the city without a car. Coming to the city without driving. It's the only place they enter the city without a car. And we can have one place in the city where you don't need a car. That'd be nice.
So, all right, well, we've got that downtown for pedestrians. So are we good with that?
No,
Okay, what would you like?
I don't think you need a mixed-use building. Just redevelop the RTD parking lot. Again,
Yeah.
You're developing a gateway for pedestrians as well as vehicular people in their cars can and also enjoy the gateway. It's not just for pedestrians. There's
Well,
a
that's
lot
true
more
right
cars,
now.
a lot more cars
Taking light rail.
going into the downtown area than pedestrians going into downtown across those bridges.
But we're talking specifically about the RTD parking lot. We're not talking about traffic coming west into downtown.
No,
This
just
might
the
be one-
RTD parking lot.
I know,
This
we're
might be
talking
one
about-
of, sorry.
Go ahead.
Andy,
There
what do
might-
you-
Sorry, this might be one of those times where if we make two bullets, we solve the problem again. So one problem that we're trying to talk about is pulling pedestrians from the RTD, the transit, into downtown. And I think,
Right.
Mark, you're talking about, it's also a gateway for cars. That's a separate bullet. That's a separate intention, which is how do we enhance this gateway,
But it's the same
including
gate.
for cars?
It's also the same gateway. You're doing for both.
Yeah.
But
And while
Mark,
we're
should
on
we
that
separate
subject-
cars from people for at least one space downtown? Yes, they would park there and then you get out, then you become a pedestrian.
That's true.
I think we should include it and let the consultant decide. This is
Okay.
what-
If, this next bullet you're working on here, enhance the gateway. One thing that I wrote down that I didn't see in the notes here, which I didn't submit, is that bridge that turns into Littleton Boulevard, the Alamo Bridge. That could be a really beautiful,
Yes.
artistic or it's a gateway out of the city, but that's something that could really use some improvement. It's all wire and mesh and fencing.
Yeah.
Well, the fencing alone will turn you off. It's the terrible design of the fencing.
Yes, but I don't see that listed here, so that might be part of that gateway. It's really, you're exiting downtown, but it could use some serious improvement.
I would say the same thing about the bridge south. I mean, I know we're getting outside of the boundaries now, but the bridge that's going south on Prince over the railroad tracks is just
yes.
Yeah, the sidewalks are way too narrow on both those. And that Alamo Bridge has a lot of pedestrian traffic on it all the time.
Yeah.
Very uncomfortable to walk on that bridge.
It is.
And there are some bridges that have been redone around the country that are really beautiful. And they're not, not terribly overdone or anything, just some artistic metal artwork. Anyway, it could use some improvement for sure, both directions.
Yeah.
Bridges over the railroad tracks.
And structurally.
I absolutely agree with that bullet point. But if we're giving guidance to the land development code, that doesn't really address, kind of public works projects like bridges, like redeveloping the RTD parking lot. That's something you could apply a zoning solution to. We want to create zoning regs that encourage that, but zoning wouldn't really say anything about improving infrastructure like bridges. I love the sentiment, and I absolutely agree. It's not a pleasant pedestrian experience on the south side of Alamo there.
Or should it go on design guidelines or something, man? It's a character issue as well. It affects the character of the gateways into and out of the city.
I think that's a more city item that city have to do it, and it doesn't belong to zoning or it's a capital budget item. I think one of the things, one bullet that I will add is all the sidewalks and pedestrian ways have to meet the ADA requirements, because Alamo Street has a lot of different locations that doesn't meet the ADA requirements.
Well, you have no choice when you're redoing a sidewalk anywhere.
Yeah. And despite what I said, I'm comfortable leaving that bullet in. I just wanted to, the consultant may not be able to come back with something in a land use code that addresses that.
Yeah, because it really is an infrastructure issue. There are a lot of problems, and it is infrastructure.
Yeah.
One thing we talked about this weekend when we were going through all these comments was pulling things like this out as separate items that just need to be done to make the city more usable, and putting them on a table in a different place. Yeah. And this is definitely one of them that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone talked about it. Yeah. Everybody has experienced it.
Yeah, it's important enough to include. It's just the land development code might not be able to help us with it.
So maybe take that out and put it in that parking lot.
Or in the transportation plan or something.
Yeah.
Likewise, we also need help with the other entrance on the other end, coming in off
getting
Santa
rid
Fe.
of parking lots.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that plaza we toured was gorgeous at the other end.
Better if the fountain worked.
Or if it wasn't right next to Highway 85.
Sure, that too.
Along the lines of the sidewalks, and Bezod mentioned the ADA, but really the historic parts of Alamo all have detached sidewalks. And since they've evolved to more recent, some of them don't have sidewalks and some of them have attached sidewalks, like the bridge. And so perhaps going forward, we could require or ask that we require detached sidewalks with that sort of tree lawn separated for all new development along there.
Not only that, there are fences that basically are kind of very close to the sidewalk. So kind of the narrow sidewalk is a concern by itself. Then you have light post trees and the fences. And I think that's something is not negotiable. Either you have to meet the ADA or not. And I think if you put a new structure, you want to be basically in compliance with the ADA, period.
In the essence of time, we probably should move on to the next page.
Yes. Let's go ahead and move down to the statement that reads, the Curtis, Nevada block of Main Street is Littleton's living room. Its 2- and 3-story structures give a sense of coziness, offering protected, shaded, intimate feelings, create additional living rooms in other areas of downtown. I liked the Littleton's living room. I thought that was neat. And you kind of know what that means.
It really defines a kind of space we'd like to see, right?
Yeah, that's the block with the 2-story structures tight to the street.
Right.
The areas that start to fail on either end are the 1-story on the east side, on the east end, and the 1-story with some dilapidated buildings, and the parking lots on the west block.
Yeah, well said. I think that's very well said.
I wouldn't say fail, Mark. I would just say not as exciting.
But okay. And if you look at any kind of fairs downtown that go on, that it's always heavy duty is in those 2 blocks. It always peters out on either end because of the lack of intimacy and coziness.
Right.
Yeah, I think on the tour that we did together, Mark, you used the term, this is where fun goes to die. And I think that's absolutely true. It is, everything peters out when you get down there.
Yeah.
It's the core. It's the core. Those are the original buildings. I was just looking at my notes. Littleton was incorporated in 1890, and those buildings, some of those buildings are built in the 1890s. So that's kind of the original core, and then everything kind of spread out from there.
And I think on the, especially on the west end, you got the horse stables, the blacksmith, the old Rick could correct me though, the Savory Spice Shop is the old livery stable.
Yeah. I mean, up until 1940, there was no highway down there. The highway was Main Street to Rapp Street. The river was right on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems like we like that. So Main Street's ambiance is due to low building heights of 1 to 2 stories at the sidewalk, pushed to the street to create intimacy, providing pedestrian scale, ease of access to commercial establishments, sense of pedestrian activity, and urban aesthetic. Does that feel accurate?
I think that
it's 1 to 3.
Yeah,
1 to 3 stories.
I like, based on what Mark just said, it's really the 2-story and up that creates that feeling of intimacy. It's not really so much the 1-story. So I wouldn't want to emphasize the 1-story part of.
Let's say predominantly 2-story structures. Whatever, just leave it at 2-story.
Yeah, and put a comma after buildings.
So let's see, is due to low building. I think low building, not plural, low building heights of 2 to 3 stories at the high at the sidewalk. Does that sound good?
2 stories with setback 3 stories. Remember, it's in the code now. The 3rd story is set back.
And there's examples on the street of 3 stories. An example.
That's true. Good point. Yeah.
But I think 1 story is important too, because on the tour I did with one of the Next Gen representatives, we were standing at the corner of Curtis and looking at the tavern and back at old Adelita's, and they have 1-story buildings right on those corners with the open space above, which people were just filled up with. And I hadn't looked at it from that standpoint, but here you have a 1-story building with all this activity right above you and very close to you, but separated from you. So if we say totally 2 stories, we could eliminate that kind of ambience that we could create.
We could say predominantly 2 stories.
Yeah. That's good.
So building heights of predominantly 1 to 2 stories at the sidewalk. We mentioned 3. Yes, Dan.
It should be building masses, because I think eventually we're going to have to distinguish, like, if you tell me I can build a 2-story building, I may make them each 20 feet tall. So it'll be a 40-foot tall building. So I'd just say low building massings rather than heights.
So building massing.
Just leave heights or massing out. Low buildings of predominantly 1 to 2 stories.
Okay.
Due to 1 to 2 story, but predominantly 1 to 2 story buildings. There's probably ways to wordsmith it.
With third stories within stories plural.
So low buildings of predominantly 1 to 2 stories at the sidewalk with third 40-story step back pushed to street to create intimacy.
Third stories stepped back. What's this push to the street?
Not all third stories. Some 1-story buildings that are significant, the second floor may be pushed step back to preserve it. So it happened at Ruth Graham's building. And that follows the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation to do that in historic districts.
It's also in our historic preservation design standards of today for historic buildings.
So push to the street, I think that referred to that these buildings are right on the street. They don't have setbacks and it's strips of space in front of them. The
there you go.
Facade, the doors open directly onto the street.
Which we kind of lost now.
Yeah, we lost
so I don't know if you want to say that these buildings are pushed to and facing the street, or is that a given?
Facing the street. If you're on the south side of Main Street, you could actually have development that would face the alley and front both sides.
Yeah, we get into that.
Is that something that we want? Do we want any building facing away from our main street?
Oh,
no.
Well, we're talking. You're right,
utilizing
Andy.
the alleys somehow. If you utilize the alleys, you could do that. The example was the Dairy Block in downtown Denver, where they turned an alley into a pedestrian area very successfully, right? It's really nice. And it's a trend that's happening in cities to keep people away from the street all the time. So you have a place that's just for people and not cars.
But Rick, Andy's question was, do we want buildings facing away, oriented away from Main Street? And I think the answer is no.
Oh, no, right.
We want to have a street-facing facade and an alley-facing facade, and both are important. So, the answer to your question, Andy, is no. We don't want buildings facing away from Main Street.
So I think we just need to change at the sidewalk to built up to the sidewalk.
Yes, okay.
Address both.
Third stories stepped back, yeah.
Stepped.
Yeah.
PPED, stepped. Isn't it stepped?
Stepped back.
There you go.
Right.
And then providing should be provide. Step back to say provide pedestrian scale. I'm not wordsmithing.
It's a run-on sentence.
Yeah, it is.
A period after intimacy.
Period.
Period. This provides, or whatever word you want to use, this provides pedestrian scale, ease of access to commercial establishments, sense of pedestrian activity, and urban aesthetic. What does that mean? Urban aesthetic? You've already said it in the previous 8 or 10 words.
So ditch urban aesthetics. So just sense of pedestrian activity, period.
That's good.
And do we want a sense of, or do we want space for pedestrian activity?
And a sense.
And then there's the intimacy and closure discussion from earlier.
Right. We're getting intimate again.
Well,
this is Mark's statement. He likes intimate.
I kind of like space for pedestrian activity. It means more to me than a sense of pedestrian activity. Let's throw that out.
Nice.
Okay.
Agree.
I like that.
Yeah.
What was it?
Space for?
Substitute space for sense.
So it just says and space for, not a space for.
Right.
Either way.
Right. Good.
Key.
Well, if we're pushing the buildings to the street, we're not providing a space for intimacy.
This is also speaking to the rest of the broader area of downtown too, not just Main Street, Mark. Because we talked about trying to create these living rooms in other areas when they develop. I mean, develop the area south of Little's Creek and Rapp Street, there could be a lot of potential there.
Okay. By the way, not to get picky, but I see a lot of different type sizes here.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay.
I thought it was my eyes.
We need an editor. Okay.
Well,
I'm sorry. Excuse me, but can we look at, I'm sorry to go back, but that third story step back to create intimacy. Can we just say step back? Because that is it really to create intimacy? Are we trying to create a sense of openness and or activity or recreation? I think we could just get rid of that. Just step back, period.
There you go. Ease of access, commercial and space for pedestrian activity.
Just a side note, Andrea, thank you for doing this.
Yes,
no one wants the job that you're doing right now. It's really hard.
I was going to say the same thing.
It is.
Well, thanks. I'm fine though. Don't worry about me.
I hope you're saving it lots and lots.
Yeah, really. That would be terrible.
Well, that's a good point. We'll save it
It
right
does say
now.
autosave is off.
Oh no.
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 Nobody saved. Oh God, yeah. We have to go through this all again. Nobody saved anything.
Save.
Thanks. Well, we'll just save it to my desktop at the moment. But okay.
A pause of anxiousness.
Mark?
Yeah.
Instead of where fun goes to die, it could be we put the fun in dysfunctional.
Who put the cot in apricots? That's the old line from Wizard of Oz. What do they got that we ain't got?
On the first bullet point, do we need to specify individuals, groups, and families? I didn't quite understand the need for that.
Yeah.
When you go back to the character definitions for a downtown area, that is one of the things is you provide for everybody. It's just kind of re-emphasizing that.
I think it's a given myself.
It could be a given, but Main Street in Littleton in the 1980s and early 90s, there was no families down there. It was dead because there's nothing to do for them. And also, you look at downtown, the ballpark area, and you're pushed to bring your family down there during the ball night, right? All the young people and all the bars and stuff. So It's sort of the character of Littleton. It's family oriented.
There's always Greg Reinke's haunted house.
Yeah, there you go. Fun for the whole family.
Bingo.
I will make the last sentence a new bullet, and I will delete as well as high-end residential. Just incorporate affordable housing building. What's a high-end residential?
Yeah.
So you would just say incorporate affordable housing, period.
Period. That's it.
Yeah, because high end's up to the individuals.
Well, so is affordable housing. Where you?
Oh, that's
No,
true too.
affordable housing has definition under HUD.
I don't understand why you wouldn't keep in high end.
What's a high end, Mark?
High end is what I can't afford.
Well, yeah, I think they're saying a mix of housing.
It's
That's
more
what
of a
I
mix
say.
of housing.
I mean, if they're going to develop what the market value is, the only thing we want to emphasize is the incorporate affordable housing, and that's set aside by HUD. Any development needs some percentage of affordable housing.
And do we want to say that we want a mixed housing stock? We want affordable and you know,
I would say mixed housing stock.
Yeah, I agree.
Rather than affordable housing.
I agree.
A mix of housing options.
Yeah.
We need housing.
Market rate and affordable. Or mixed, yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's either it's market rate or it's affordable. So
The
mix works.
No, the city can dictate that. The
Right.
market will dictate.
The only thing I would raise with that one is I wonder if the consultants will think that what we mean is a single family house and a duplex and an apartment rather than the housing prices. We want to be more clear that we mean a range of housing prices.
Yeah, incorporate a mix of housing options, both in unit type and affordability or something like that.
I think this is only applied to the multifamily housing.
Well, we wanted to have diversity downtown. Right now, that's not happening in the north. We did end up with Section 8 housing on Main Street. I wouldn't say that's totally successful. Affordable housing is an investment procedure that the developer does.
I like that. Housing type and price. That's good.
Well, you don't need to repeat the word housing in terms of a type and price. There
It does make sense to be to communicate what it is we're trying to do. And if we're trying to get more affordable housing located near transit, then I think we should say that.
Call that out.
Why don't you say housing alternatives and price points?
That works.
I like that.
Yeah, the comp plan says we want more affordable housing, right? So, and there's not many places to put it, and downtown's one of them.
Well, the key is to have a mix, a vibrant mix of all kinds of housing.
Right.
Okay, and then support
Can we
high
say a mix
density.
can we say a mix of housing, including affordable, or what was the other word that someone gave?
Well, I think the price points was including the affordable.
Yeah.
Andy, do you specifically want the word affordable in there?
I do. I think we heard it in the comp plan and it makes sense. It just as a planner, it makes sense to put affordable housing near jobs, near transit.
Price point says that. You don't need to add anything more.
Right.
Okay.
I like what Andrew is doing here. I mean, what Andrew is typing here, which is to specifically call out including affordable at the end. I mean, you can have a mix of price points way up high and in the middle.
Starting at 600.
Very high.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, I like affordable because It does have a specific meaning.
I think
The
the
next
new
one
buzzword is
You're
attainable.
sort of getting it with alternatives as well. The idea being that, you know, you've got different types of housing product.
Yes, and Reed, did you say attainable? You prefer that word to affordable?
I think that's kind of the new buzzword.
Yeah.
I actually like that. I like that better.
It's actually an old buzzword.
Yeah, it is.
We used that many years ago in housing studies. But it's okay. It's a good word.
All right, and then support higher density and taller infill buildings of 2 to 3 stories and even 4.
This is after the Historic Preservation Board fought the 4th story and got rid of the 4th story on the northwest corner of Main Street. Where's this 4th story coming from?
I like 4 being there at all.
So
I mean, from the apartments on Prince Street with the ice cream shop.
This isn't just Main Street. This is the downtown area. And the one thing that we're talking about was perhaps if the downtown area could have 4 stories on the edges, along Church Street, along Prince Street, down south. Not just so. Trying to keep this as a broader area, broader document for the whole downtown. While we'll be focusing on Main and Alamo, but it's for the whole downtown for the planning process we're doing right now.
But wait a second.
But this bullet point is under Main Street.
This whole document is Main Street and Prince Street.
Yeah.
I think that this is a dangerous precedent to set by saying even.
And we need to move that 4 stories out of there if it's on Main Street.
Yeah, because it does. You know, I agree. Let's lose 4.
We do have 4 stories on Prince Street, just off Main Street.
Let me ask you a question. This is the feedback that you got from people. So are you editing people's feedback?
I've had that question a couple times, and the 4 story was not specifically on Main Street in Alamo. It is the apartments over the ice cream shop. And that is, you know, a few blocks down on Prince Street.
Yeah. So I'd be very careful if people make the comment that you basically relaying feedback based on those comments. Do not take their words and massage it. Put it the way they wanted it, because that's kind of a spirit of transparency. If the public wants 4 story, let them have their say, and then majority rules.
It is 4 story, but not on Main Street. It was for the downtown area because we have 4 story buildings already.
So it appropriately does not belong in this document.
Okay.
Why are you typing it in then? Appropriate elsewhere, or? Yeah, but this is a document for Main Street and.
No, we're viewing it as a document for the whole downtown area with a focus on Main Street and Alamo.
Is that what it said?
No, I don't read it like that, Mark. I agree with you. This is a Main Street ambient.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 4 story. It doesn't feel like it belongs here.
Okay. The question that I have is very simple. You did this based on the tour that you have. Where was the tour take place? Main Street and Alamo or whole downtown?
It was Main Street and Alamo, and specifically when people were talking about 4 story, and we had people that talked about larger buildings across Santa Fe, or down on Church Street, or up.
But do they want those in Main Street? If they want in Main Street, you need to put it in there.
No, they do not. Absolutely not.
No, it could have been one person saying that. That doesn't mean that the majority of people want that.
Yeah.
No. I think we should put in there what we heard overall.
And 4 story was not, I wouldn't put 4 story in here at all because it was not uttered on Main Street and Alamo. It was specifically.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say
specifically talking about other parts of the community.
What if we just take that off and say support higher density and taller infill buildings, period?
Yeah, and let the zoning people decide what to allow. We already voted on number of stories and height of the building and so forth.
Well, people were very, very clear that, 2 to 3 stories were all, I like that. And when we were talking taller on Alamo and Main Street, they were very uncomfortable. So the 2 to 3 stories is pretty key, I think.
Maybe we just need to be more clear in this sentence and say support higher density and taller infill buildings of 2 to 3 stories on Alamo Street and Main Street, and then just be done with that's the direction that we're giving. We're not giving direction outside of those streets specific.
I agree with that.
That's a good call.
Yeah.
I'd almost get rid of higher density and just say support buildings up to 3 stories along Alamo and Main Street.
Bingo. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That's good.
Thank you, Dan.
Good editing.
Dan, should we have the word infill or not? I guess we don't need infill. If you want to put another story on an existing building and you do it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they go for redevelopment, but
detail, basically.
Yeah.
Rick, by the way, the title of this whole document is Maintaining Littleton's Community Character and Historic Downtown, Alamo and Main Streets.
All right.
So, I tend to want to expand it too, but I keep coming back to Alamo and Main Street. We're going to be covering the entire football
with the rest of it.
With the rest of it, exactly.
Right. I know.
Then we can, then we can, help yourself. It's going to be fun.
Okay, and then second stories, second and third stories need to be stepped back from the street. Do we need that, or is that already a thing? Do we?
Already a thing.
Yeah.
And why second stories?
Yeah, if you were building a brand new 3-story building, you'd have to step it back after the first story and the second story. Is that what we're saying?
No, it's just the second.
After the second.
You only need to step back the second story if it's already only an existing 1-story building. That's what my.
No. So it has to be set back after the first story if it's a contributing building in the historic district.
So just if it's existing, but a new building that was 3 stories, the only rule is that after the second story, it needs to be.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And also the new ones have a height requirement.
Depends.
Now, do we need that sentence at all? Or
No.
is that already?
No, we don't need it.
Yeah.
Is that already written in stone in the downtown standards?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so we don't need it. And then encourage rooftop dining, gathering, living space to encourage a sense of vibrancy. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Are we for it?
You don't need encourage twice in there, but
I like the vibrancy.
Create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see, create pedestrian pathways through the built environment that are separated from the streets.
What does that mean?
That means those little passageways that you see them in the Main Street apartments, for instance, on Main Street.
I don't see it happening anywhere else, though. That's maybe
we have the alleys. You can utilize the alleys as pedestrian pathways.
Yeah, but do you see a hard-nosed building owner or a property owner carving out a passageway when he could put in more storefront on Main Street? I kind of doubt that much of that would happen.
I think it's supposed to refer to the alley perpendicular to the street as well as parallel to the street. There are some pass-throughs that actually would make nice little outdoor dining areas or whatever.
You could say
it encourages intimacy in the city, Mark.
Yeah, but Mark, again, it goes back. This is a feedback from people, so that they entitled to their opinion. That doesn't mean we need to adopt those.
All right. Okay, we used instead of create, encourage.
Encourage.
The View House has a pedestrian pathway over to Alamo from their building.
That's true. I'm not speaking against it. I'm just saying that it's not likely to happen.
Encourage is good.
Well, I could see it happening. I could see it happening on the in the northwest north side of Main Street on the west end. It could happen there.
It happens in Bega Park too.
Do we want to encourage it, or we will basically consider it, or consider?
Consider a good word.
Yeah.
I'd like to have consider just because it's a different word, quite frankly.
Encourage it. I mean, everybody going to put it, so it's everybody.
We've got some good editors here. This is good.
And then, okay, emphasize the use of appropriately colored brick in building construction. And I'll tell you where that came from. And that came up a couple times. That there are certain buildings downtown that have brick facades. The apartment building that's right next to, Town Hall Arts Center, also Littleton Apartments or Main Street Apartments or whatever they're called. That brick is just not a brick that would be found in Colorado, because brick is typically, it relates to the earth of the city that it's in. And those kind of like, confetti, tutti frutti colored bricks are just, they're not historic. They just don't belong. It's just the wrong color brick. And one of the things that everybody said many, many times was that they like red brick the best. I didn't include that in here. I just, thought that was a bit of a value judgment, but people like that red brick. But anyway, appropriately colored brick. And I don't know if we want to keep that in or not, but it did come up several times.
Well, rather than brick, could you, you're excluding other materials, building materials, building finishes, instead of just brick.
So you could say if using brick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about, I think equally as important as the color of the brick is the thickness of the grout and the profile of the grout, the color of the grout. So it's almost just appropriate brick.
That's always forgotten when you get a bad building, they forget the mortar.
I have a question. Do we have a color architectural requirement for downtown?
Well,
what colors can you paint or not?
We kind of got rid of them with the rewrite of the design standards a couple years ago because they were out of date.
So isn't that make sense to come up with a palette of colors that are acceptable and basically enforce it that way?
Down the road, I could see adding that, or not make it mandatory, but here's a suggestion of a color palette.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only brick. Let's say you have window and you paint them red and you have yellow brick and you have a black awning,
Well, you got great color sense there, Behzad.
No, I have seen that actually.
Yeah.
I said use appropriate color scheme, and I think we should consider to have some kind of requirements for colors in downtown zone.
All right. When
trying to tie it back to either compatibility rather than appropriate.
Yeah.
Compatibility or
locally sourced or
predominant colored. Yeah.
Yeah, I just did a quick street tour, and there's a fair number of buildings that look like they have brown brick. One has a very light brown. I mean, it's not all.
Yeah.
Does one have green?
Well, and some are painted. One does have green because it's painted.
I think the main thing here is forget the antique Disney World type approach to what people think is historic, which never is.
No.
I mean, that's what we're trying to get at, because a lot of a huge amount of the buildings downtown are all brick of various kinds.
Yeah.
It's the fake brick that we don't like.
Yeah.
But I do have a new architecture expression I can use. Kim came up with tutti frutti brick. I love that.
And it is. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is. No, it's appropriate.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Or maybe we just, you don't even have to talk about brick, just emphasize the use of locally appropriate color scheme in building construction.
Right.
Yeah,
I agree.
It
with
should
that.
be any material. I mean,
Any
fencing,
exterior.
color, everything.
Yeah.
Although,
Right.
if I recall right, there was for years a pink stucco building downtown.
Oh yeah, the pink Lola's candy
yeah.
used to be pink.
Right.
And
What
and
color
there
was
is
Jose's?
it was
Like,
kind of
Looks like tan.
With some
Wasn't it dark
stucco.
gray?
Tannish white outside.
Sorry.
yeah but you're right that Jason, the predominant colors in brick are brown and red downtown,
Yep.
except for the fakey ones. Yeah.
no, Coors building, blonde brick.
Yeah. And that's a magnificent building.
Yeah, it's light tan to red to brown.
Yeah. And
So
they're
is
all
pink-
colors found in nature.
Is pink stucco locally appropriate then? Should we?
Well, pink rhyolite would be.
Yes, absolutely.
You could say organic colors.
Yeah, it gets dangerous
Not
when
a
you
new
start
buzzword.
specifying a paint color.
Yeah.
Paint is reversible, but when you're talking about materials like brick, which is more permanent, though you
Yeah.
can paint brick, and brick was commonly painted anyway on buildings. Even historically, they would paint brick buildings.
Yes.
So
And then we get to examples of successful developments. Do we want to go back to the locally appropriate colors? Are we not done with that?
No,
Oh, okay.
I think the last bullet just seems inappropriate here, specifically noting specific buildings.
Yeah, do we want that or not?
No.
No.
I think that's
Yeah.
subjective.
Okay, ditch it.
Did you? All right.
I think what we talked about in our tour is that there are some successful examples in downtown.
Yeah.
That's important to know that it has been done.
Right.
yeah, and the reason that I that's mine, I put that in. You got the Heckendorn building, big development, very successful at the East End. Main Street Apartments is pretty nice. Most people tend to, not Main Street Apartment, Kittredge building, the Main Street mixed use is pretty nice building. The View House, the Adelitas, all those are pretty nice, the way they were developed. And we can look at the ones that weren't nice, but the idea was if we have nice ones, let's recognize them. But that can be done in other ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like use them as examples for other parts of the city. Right.
Well, if you can have the good examples, you should, have the rogues list of bad examples. So
Oh, boy.
delete the whole thing, like you
Yeah.
have done.
That's okay.
And then turn underutilized features into Littleton signature spaces. And that is every single tour talked about activating the alley between Main Street and Alamo, which is a 4-block alley. Everybody talked about that. Creating intimate areas in the alley. Buildings must present an attractive facade to the alley and incorporate alley backdoor access and entry. Again, with the activation. And alleyways must be well lit and safe for pedestrian as well as provide access for deliveries and trash collection, because those are working alleys. If businesses get their deliveries, their, beer trucks go in there and you have to be mindful of that. So we're not talking about pedestrian alleys. We're talking about working alleys that have been activated.
So
Shared streets.
This thing is kind of contradict what you said. You said well lit, safe for pedestrian. And then on the other hand, those are for trash collection. There is above ground utility lines, poles. It's very hard to access even with a car. So,
Right.
First thing to do is underground those electric lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. And pedestrians do use those alleys. So they are serving that purpose now. But what we're saying is, and what everyone was pretty much saying is, we want to activate those alleys. We want to use them. more than, they're being used currently.
How much money they're willing to spend and from what budget?
Would there have to be any zoning changes for those alleys to be more usable?
No.
No.
No, okay.
The economic development potential is there, and there's some other cities that are doing some really cool things with them, like Fort Collins and Longmont, and even downtown Denver at the milk block.
Dairy block. Yeah.
Dairy block, yeah.
So are we okay with just leaving that one as is?
Yeah. Wouldn't bother me.
I think that's something that city have to decide, because I understand those are belong to the city.
It's part of our character. And so we're trying to create the character. It's ever evolving.
Yeah. And the whole idea, that they are working alleys, the access and things like that, that is their charm. That's why they're called alleys. These aren't little, Disney World cut-throughs or something like that. The charm is that it is a working alley in an urban area.
But to me, the most important, one of the most important items is the alley facades. Drives me crazy when they use cheap materials. On the front, they've got brick. The sides kind of brick, and the back is cheapo. It just always looks bad.
Yeah.
And from Alamo looking north, you can see those buildings, and it looks pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they call them back alleys for a reason.
Maybe you want to insert compatible facade. So it's basically whatever they use in front, they use in the back.
Instead of attractive.
I think they have their own charm. Alleys have their own charm from a pedestrian standpoint. They do create intimacy just because of the nature of their design. This is more, let's take advantage of it in the downtown area. Make as much of downtown pedestrian oriented that we can to promote economic development.
I would say buildings must present an attractive facade. To me implies face, and that would be the front of the building, and the alley side is going to be the rear of the building. So facade to me is misleading.
Okay.
It could be entry or access or
elevation.
Elevation.
Let's use elevation, because you don't want to say attractive rear. I think that would be bad.
Usually facade is the face, and then you either have sides or elevations.
Yeah, let's use elevation.
Elevation to the alley, add the for alley. Thank you.
Or alley elevation, I don't know.
To the alley.
To the alley, that's great. Okay, are we okay with that? Can we move to Biga Park?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So envision Biga Park as a purposeful, inviting space, and ideas were incorporate restaurant, food truck uses, children's uses, such as the splash pad. The one thing, it was a great statement that someone said on the tour was that I'm confused by Biga Park. I don't know what to do in Biga Park. So it's like that. This is a confusing space that doesn't really make sense. What are we doing with Biga Park? So it's an opportunity is the bottom line. So I don't know what to do in Biga Park, but it's an opportunity.
And by the way, food trucks, that doesn't sound right. Food carts, maybe trucks in there.
Well, somebody suggested that I guess it's Biga Street, that the little cut through that goes from Alamo to Main Street or Littleton Boulevard could be blocked off either permanently or on occasion to put food trucks in there.
It's a well-used street.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I use it all the time. You go up there, then you head east.
Okay.
And fire
that
truck
was the suggestion.
You could make it wider, though. You could widen it. But right now, Biga Park is primarily a place you walk back and forth between the parking lots. RTD.
Right.
Really,
and to the RTD. That's right. It's part of that improvement to the RTD RTD gateway we talked about also.
Potentially, yeah.
So this is
improvement project.
Yeah,
right?
this is
Not a
really
zoning.
just, it's an opportunity. Let's do something with it.
Yeah.
And those were just some of the ideas.
Okay. By the way, just right across from Bega is the north parking lot. We talked about a signature structure, an entry structure, gateway structure on the south parking lot where the train station is. But that north parking lot cries out for a signature structure.
Or the bank parking lot is.
The bank? Not the
Okay.
bank. The north.
The overflow.
Rio
Behind
Grande
Ned
Street.
Kelly's.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, the long slender piece. That's a, you could repeat that same sentence that we used before on Alamo and put it on the east end of Main Street if it fits.
I was just looking at the aerial photograph of that, and if you did do something there on the north parking lot and on this RTD lot, that would sort of enclose, there's that word again, enclosure, sort of enclose Bega Park and make it more of a meaningful place.
Yes, great. Great opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
Craig, is there put your landscape designer architect hat on, but is there anything, I mean, some of these suggestions here are program elements. Is there anything else that the park could use that would help to activate it more that doesn't rely on program elements?
Well,
it's your design problem.
One of the problems with the park right now is interface between the park and the Chase parking lot on the north side of Alamo. If that ever became available for additional park space, I think that would be a huge, a good way to improve the park.
And the other thing is South Suburban's not maintaining it, and it's really become trashy. I mean, it's very significant historically because of the signing of the sister city agreement there. And that's really gone downhill. I mean, when that was maintained more, people would go there and look at it. But right now, the lack of maintenance is causing a lot of people not to want to be in the park.
Yeah, people in general were, in talking about this, were basically not comfortable in the park.
do we rezone it and allow a structure to go in there with a small sidewalk to get from here to there for RGD?
No, there's too many trees. You got to open it up.
Yeah.
I have a picture from 1982. There's only 2 trees in that park.
I use Bega Street all the time as a cut through, and I know it gets a lot of traffic, but I wouldn't mind seeing that go away to improve the park.
Well, if Main Street can be closed for a whole weekend for the whole summer, I mean, what's to say that you can't close it for food truck use or activate it more and close it for weekends here and there to do food truck stuff?
Just keep in mind, everybody going, I use it all the time. You go north on Rio Grande and then
I did it the other night when I went to the tour.
And you want to go.
First time I went on that street, actually.
And you want to go east on Littleton Boulevard. Now you're forcing traffic going north on Rio Grande to go west, clog up downtown, and then they do a loop around where the post office is, and then they can head east. It's tough.
Mark, you mentioned it could be an issue with fire service. If you got fire and EMTs need access, that could be a bit of an issue.
That's really why it's there, is for the fire access, because before that was put in, they would loop around through the downtown blasting their sirens. It takes 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
And right now, as long as the fire station stays there, I don't think South Metro is going to be conducive to anything happening with that.
Yeah.
That road.
Good point.
So we have had little jams go on in Bega Park, so there has been some activation.
But the thing
that was used to.
It sounds like there's not a lot of consensus about what to do with Bega Park.
Yeah.
We all know maybe it's something that needs to be rethought. So maybe we just do something general that says rethink the use of Bega Park and as a purposeful inviting space, and then that's it.
Yeah, use and design.
I really like that rethink.
Yeah, it was used a lot. part. I mean, the fact that it's not being maintained, that there's no flowers in there, that the little Sister City emblem on the ground hasn't been painted. It just looks trashy. When places look trashy, you don't go in them. That's just the bottom line. And then that fence that the RTD put up to keep people from walking across makes it look bad as well, and really uninviting.
Yeah.
Well, there was a need for that fence because people were cutting across, but still.
I think you need to add integrated into the downtown somehow, because that by itself is sitting there. Downtown is sitting there, all the commercial bars, restaurants, that need to be integrated into that whole fabric. So if you want to use it, you have to integrate it.
Right.
Yeah, and you just never go there.
I mean,
it's scary at night.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, the light is bad. There's fencing that doesn't belong there. It's not really feel like a park. It feel like a boulevard more than a park. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those lonely spaces.
Over time.
Yeah, one of those lonely spaces you kind of stay away from.
Well, if you're going to go downtown, you go downtown to shop or dine, drink, what have you. You don't. If you want to go to a park, you go to your own park, like Kettering or what have you. You're not going to spend any time in that park.
I thought Kim had an interesting idea on our tour. She was talking about, boy, if you could redevelop the Littleton apartments, that maybe they would have some active uses or cafes or something that open onto that park, just to activate it a little bit more.
That was a big mistake on their part. They should have had a cafe opening up to the park on the east side of that building.
Oh yeah,
Rick, you should have insisted on it, Rick.
In 1997, they were lucky to get the building down there. Nobody was there. But there's great opportunity because you have the whole Chase Bank parking lot that's underutilized there, right? There's a lot going on. So
good.
Yeah, it is an opportunity. It truly is.
Gang, let me remind you, if we go past 10 o'clock, we have to vote to continue. So.
Well, we only have 3 more sentences.
Okay.
Not in study sessions, actually.
What's
that? You can go all night.
Study sessions, you can go all night. It's the regular meetings and special meetings you have to vote.
Man, Rick.
All right.
Out of order.
Optimize Little's Creek as an inviting, clean, well-lit pedestrian greenway and view shed from Prince Street to Santa Fe. It is the southern boundary of Littleton's proper historic district. So what's not to like?
Nothing, it's good.
I like it. I'm wondering if it's enough. One thing I'm thinking about is if any of those properties along Little's Creek redevelops, I would hate for them to wall off or wall in Little's Creek. I'd like them to access. There are other communities in the state that require that. And so does our statement say enough to get at that, if you all agree?
Yeah, we could say all buildings need to be activated to the creek.
Or oriented.
Or the side of the building facing the creek needs to be activated.
That would be wonderful.
Good idea.
If we don't state that, that will become a really bad space forever and ever.
Gotcha.
Imagine a 3 or 4 story building on the north side or on the south side casting a shadow. It'll become a sewer.
Or it'll be nice and cool in the summertime.
Actually, somebody referred to, and I don't remember who this was, but they did say that we should do something with it instead of having it be an active or an open sewer. That's what they referred to Little's Creek as. And it was like, oh, I don't really think it's an open sewer, but maybe we should clean it up.
It just smells like it from the water from Stern Parkway because it is awful water coming down there.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about on the tour I was on. Is there's a lot of opportunity along Little's Creek to have something special happen there. I mean, it's the only water feature running through downtown. And it's a very effective storm drainage feature right now, and it controls flooding very well, but it's not attractive.
And it's the only direct pedestrian link to the Mary Carter Greenway, which has hundreds of thousands of people going up and down it all the time.
Yeah, and this gets back to the point earlier about the connection to the Platte. This is the pedestrian and bicycle connection to the Platte.
So in terms of development on the creek, you know, keeping the creek intact all the way from Prince Street all the way across Santa Fe. And that means if you're developing on any of those parcels that are along the creek, you have to be very mindful of that. And the city has to be mindful of that.
Riverfront, when it was developed, was totally oriented to Little's Creek. It just, of course, it didn't work. But when it was first there, it was a great space to be in on that side.
And you could, it's a great view shed. There are trees blocking that now, but it is a view shed that goes to Riverfront Center. Okay, well then let's go ahead and move to the last bullet, which is clearly define and strengthen Littleton's east and west entry gateways. So Littleton Boulevard and the West Bowls, again, they are opportunities. I don't think anyone was completely happy with the way they are right now. So it's just define it and strengthen it.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. And
there's
then
two more. There's two more.
Oh, no. There are? Oh, okay. Now this came up several times. When you're walking on Alamo from Prince Street to Nevada, between the post office and ACC, I mean, that's just, you know, a dead walk that you must endure. And it's just, it's not pleasant. With ACC right here in your face when you're walking down there, or the post office and the blue fence right over there. And we were talking about a way to vitalize that. And someone pointed out, and this is really true, that ACC building is the Art and Design Center, that's where they have those classes. There isn't a piece of art or anything designy at all on that building as you walk past. So I thought that was just an interesting observation.
The diagonal entry has two lonely little bushes, one on either side of the of that diagonal entry that nobody ever uses. No street furniture, no nothing. It's awful.
I think if you could get the post office to change out that blue fence, that would make a huge difference on that corner anyhow.
Yeah, we were talking about that too, even like a decorative steel picket fence or something like that.
Yeah.
Semi opaque like it is now, kind of, but good God.
But less blue.
What are they protecting?
Yes. Red, white, and blue, somebody mentioned. Yeah.
Right. And it was create a stronger connection with the light rail station, because again, you come off the light rail, and if you're going to go up Alamo, you basically just have to trudge up that block, and there's just kind of got to be a better way.
You're getting pretty specific with that bullet point. I mean, we could have 20 others that talk about specific areas. Does this really belong?
Yeah. Everybody talked about it, but does it belong?
Does it belong in this report here? Again, we could have 20 others, and I can think of a dozen right off the top of my head.
The second one does. The second sentence in there, create the stronger connection to light rail. There's a lot of improvements on that Prince Street Alamo intersection that could make it much nicer for pedestrians.
Okay. All right, that's a good point. All right, let's do the last one and get out of here before 10.
Yeah, well, we have one more little thing to do with the last one, but preserve and capitalize on the view of the Columbine Mill as the defined tallest landmark in the city. Keep Columbine Mill in its authentic location. So don't move the mill.
So
So
how about original location instead of authentic?
Yeah.
do we like that?
Yeah. it's-
Original.
Good catch.
The thing I just wanted to mention about this, because when I was on the tour, we were standing in one of the vacant lots on Alamo. And when I worked with the National and State Register program, the State Register had one additional criterion that was not in the National Register criteria, and that was geographic significance. And I feel like the Columbine Mill kind of fits that, where you know where you're at because of that mill.
The landmark.
It's a visual landmark. And you know, when you're coming down Santa Fe and you see that, you know where you are because of it. And so I think anything that goes in along Alamo as infill in some of those open parking lots has to be cognizant of the viewshed of the Columbine Mill, because it is such a visual identifier.
It will always be the tallest structure downtown at 71 feet.
Anybody look at the buildings itself structurally? Because a couple of years ago, when I look at the structure of the building, was in very bad shape. So I don't know how you're going to preserve that. I don't know.
Rick, are you suggesting it's our Washington Monument?
I would. I mean, that's one of the first landmarked buildings in Littleton. If anything represents architectural heritage, agricultural heritage, and our early heritage, it's that building for sure. As far as fixing it up, any building can be fixed. It's easy to say they can be torn down, but any building can be fixed.
Restored.
Matter of cost.
Restored. It can be restored. If you really want it, then you do it.
But that's a privately owned. So if the owner is neglecting it, what kind of enforcement is there for?
Well, our code does offer enforcement. We're just not doing it.
What about encouragement rather than enforcement? You know, if it's locally landmarked and Littleton is a CLG, then they qualify for tax credits. So couldn't we encourage them to take advantage of tax credits? Apply for a grant on their behalf to help fix up the building.
Yeah, so we've done that throughout the years, but I think it's in pretty sorry shape, and no one has been willing to take on the project, unfortunately.
Someday, though, Andrea, if we're going to say because it's old, it's in sorry shape, we might as well just start tearing them all down. Really, that's not what historic preservation is all about. Anyone who is very creative can make anything work anywhere, and I've seen it.
Find a solution.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I'm just giving some history as to why has it happened.
Yeah,
that's
part of its location. It never worked as a restaurant because downtown never even had any restaurants, and nobody would go over there. It was not a nice place. That's why nothing's ever worked there. It was too far away from Main Street.
Yeah,
I mean, think about it. Main Street didn't have restaurants on it really until about 15 years ago.
Andrea, didn't Longmont, maybe I'm confusing Longmont with another city, but didn't they have a mill that it was the same kind of thing where the people were trying to find a new use for it?
Well, Longmont does have a mill, and I'm not sure what happened to that. I'm more familiar with Windsor's mill, and they were really trying to fix it up, and then they had all these there's a fire and this, but they kept at it. And I believe it's opened at this point.
And Arvada's mill is a wonderful example of a mill that has been preserved and is a vital part of their downtown.
So is this something that, you know, like as a board member, that I could contact these other mills, you know, these other communities and ask them how they went through the process and to gain some insight as to how they made it successful, so that we could learn from that and see how we could make it work for our mill?
Yeah, I think I did visit Windsor as part of a tour, and their piece was that they developed a bid And so the city put in some money, and then they collected some taxes, and that was one piece of it. And yeah, they got some major grants from the state as well.
Yeah, business improvement district. This is getting into the weeds a little bit, but someone mentioned property tax credits, which can be challenging in a community that relies on sales tax because the property taxes are fairly low, even on some of these commercial buildings. So the credits you get might not, support the need.
But there's federal and state tax credits as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
those
it's
are
probably
pretty lucrative.
Probably from a lot of buckets the money would have to come from.
That would just be one piece of the pie, but if it's one more thing that helps get over that hurdle, then it's worth exploring, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
So the question here is, how important is this building to the city's identity? And once you answer that question, then you know how you're going to move forward.
So can I ask the question of, is it the mill itself, the tower structure, the mill itself that is important, or is its location important?
Both and?
Both.
Both.
Because that's a huge building to try and move. It's not like a one-story commercial building or a house. It's tall. And then you've got to figure out, where would you put? Where else would you put it?
That's not a problem. Anything can be moved. There's buildings that have been moved that are much bigger than this building.
Well, so they do not move the whole building. What they do is they disassemble it. They make a correct structure and rebuild the facade outside from the material. But the structural integrity of the interior is compromised. So you cannot use the existing building to move it. It will fall apart.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe a little bit of a concern is I think both of these boards are familiar with the potential P4 process coming down the line with a developer who may want to, while keeping the mill intact or doing as Bazad says to, kind of structurally fix it. It may move, at least a proposal that I had heard is that it was going to move a little front and center, so it wasn't going to be exactly on the same spot, but it wasn't as if it was going to be shipped off to Santa Fe and Mineral.
This is going to be, well, I guess the point here is how important is the mill? We have a process for dealing with development that occurs there and impacts on the building. That would come up later, but from a citizen in Littleton who's been here since 1981, and our comp plan we just did, where we said we want an authentic city. How much is the citizens willing to stand up by that? If you're not, there's a lot of buildings that can be removed that will change the character of the city in a very short period of time. And it's been happening already very slowly. But as we look at economic development, it will happen very fast. And once it starts, you don't realize this happened until it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
on that note, we're going to have to leave Columbine Mill here. We're at the end of our meeting.
Yeah, and we have one more thing to do before we can turn this over to editing. One is we talked about taking the paragraph on page, I think it was page 2, about be intentional, not uniform, don't settle, and all of that, and moving it to the end of the document. Would you like to do that? Is it a good thing to close with?
Yep.
Either move it to the front or move it to the back, and put it in, heavy duty bold type. I was thinking this needs an end, and let's go ahead and put the bold ital at the end. Let's move that paragraph to the end and do bold ital. Now, what happens next with this?
Mark, you kindly volunteered your wife to edit it.
It might take a hell of a long time here. Can I get the staff to reissue this thing as best they can by tomorrow at 5? So we get a chance to look at it.
I can do it tonight.
Good. Okay. So everybody's gonna get a refreshed new copy of this to take a look at. You might try to go through and do a little editing with commas, punctuation, etc., spelling.
Yeah,
Anyway.
There's typos in it and stuff like that, definitely.
So put it out by tomorrow. We can all look at it and send in our edits and back to you. I assume it goes to Andrea, right?
Yep.
Okay. And you can CC everybody. If you have comments, you can CC everybody to take a look at it. And then let's say Thursday at the latest, it's out of here. I can ask my wife to take a look at it. She could change this, she could really change a lot of this document, but I think I would ask her to do a light editing if she's willing to do so.
And then, so the plan is, today is Monday. We will get it, we will all get it on Tuesday. Is that correct? Is that what I understand? And then let's say by Wednesday morning or Wednesday noon or something like that, can it go back to Andrea, and then with the intent of giving it to the consultants on Thursday? Does that make sense?
Yes. It's the Thursday's deadline, okay? It's fast.
Okay.
It'll force us to all look at it quickly.
It does.
Tuesday to Wednesday, and make last minute edits and get it out of here.
So basically our deadline to get it to Andrea is Wednesday at noon, high noon,
Okay.
Andrea's desk.
Okay.
All right. Well, I just want to say thanks. I think this has been an incredible experience. Everybody was really engaged. Good language. Again, this has been a great process. It's been absolutely fantastic, and it's led to wonderful discussion here tonight. And so I want to thank all of you for participating in this.
Thank you.
Good job. Okay.
Appreciate it.
All
Yeah,
right.
thumbs up. Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Get your
All
edits
right.
in, okay?